basically, you do want to make sure to... Trichinosis is actually killed in the previous. It's bear meat, cooked in bear fat, dripped with bear fat.
In the silent wilderness, a creaking sound emerges. A man is frantically sawing a bone. He is in the uninhabited area of southern Alaska, a paradise where the black-tailed deer family has lived for generations. Today, an uninvited guest has arrived. His name is Steven Rinella, a full-time hunter who makes a living by hunting. He flew in with plans to stay for a few days, carrying supplies and a rifle. His first task is to set up a tent, as the nights here are cold with howling winds and temperatures dropping below zero. He curbs his urge to hunt immediately and patiently sets up his tent. After loading his rifle, he eagerly heads to the mountains. However, the rugged terrain and wind resistance quickly drain his energy. Soon, Steven feels tired and looks around for deer, but the forest seems devilish with only bizarre trees in sight. No animals visible. Frustrated, he continues climbing, enjoying the challenge of hunting on foot and exploring unknown areas, which gives him a strong sense of conquest. Each summit climb feels like a thrilling reward. Curious about what lies behind the mountain, he finds more mountains and a lake in the valley. Using his binoculars, he searches for wildlife near the lake but is disappointed by the absence of animals. Continuing his search, he eventually spots a deer through his binoculars. Seeing its robust figure, he knows it's a mature buck. Hormones surging, he is determined to hunt it. Quietly setting up his rifle, the buck senses danger and becomes alert. As Steven is about to shoot, the buck moves behind bushes. To avoid startling it, Steven doesn't shoot, but mimics a deer call which confuses the buck. It looks around, senses something off, and hides. Steven realizes waiting won't yield results and decides to take the initiative. Suddenly, a heavy rain disrupts his plans, forcing animals to hide and him to seek shelter. Disappointed but persistent, he keeps watching with his binoculars. After a while, he spots a deer again. As he sets up his rifle, fog rolls in, blocking his view. Feeling unwelcome by the mountain's spirit, he prays for better luck, but the rain intensifies, chilling his fingers. After sitting in the pouring rain for an hour, he realizes he won't succeed today and heads back to camp before dark, appearing exhausted. Back at camp, the tent flaps in the wind, indicating another cold night. The next day, after the rain, the air smells of earth, and a beautiful rainbow appears, signaling good luck. Soon he finds a deer about 1,600 yards away. He quickly approaches, and the deer remains nearby but senses danger. Steven jogs to a higher position, and the deer pauses, giving him enough time to set up his rifle and load it. After aiming, he fires, but the shot misses high, and the deer escapes over the ridge. Regretting the missed opportunity, he adjusts his mood, shoulders his rifle, and resumes his hunt. Unfortunately, he doesn't see any more deer and returns to camp, resigned. Before reaching the camp, the fog cleared again. So, he sat by the lake to see if any deer would come to drink. His judgment was right. Soon a buck appeared. Steven silently set up his rifle, and the cooperative buck stayed in place. It was struck down by a hot bullet. Steven laughed heartily, having successfully hunted. Now, he was ready to collect his prize. Upon closer inspection, he saw the buck was well fed and could yield 50 pounds of meat. However, as it was getting dark, with only an hour left before nightfall, Steven had no time to process it fully and had to bring it back to camp whole. First, he removed the organs, which decay fastest, and washed them with river water. Afterward, he dragged the deer back to camp, excited. At dawn, without hesitation, he began butchering the buck. He skinned it, and while cutting near the wound, he saw a 7mm round hole. He removed the bullet, then continued butchering the meat, which he sorted, packed, and loaded into his backpack. With fresh, organic meat secured, he was ready to return fully loaded. Next, he eagerly anticipated tasting the fresh meat. He selected 2 prime tenderloins, tenderized them with a stone, set up a gas stove, poured some oil in the pan, and when the oil was hot, added the tenderloins. The sizzling sound was highly anticipated. After a short wait, the meat was cooked. He picked it up with a knife, and its aroma was enticing. He took a bite. The meat was tender and delicious. This is why Steven chose this lifestyle. He loves the natural delicacies. He is a true food lover. For a taste of delicious deer meat, he would hunt in the deep mountains, get fresh ingredients, and satisfy his cravings on the spot. This happiness deeply fascinated him. The next day, he arrived in central Alaska, where towering snow-capped mountains are home to black bears. Indeed, today's target was a black bear. Even this formidable predator was just another item on Steven's menu. The bears mainly ate blueberries, fattening up with naturally fragrant bear meat, which is extremely delicious. He parked his car by the river, then entered the unknown area on an inflatable raft. Though the snow mountain seemed close, the distance was still vast. After a while, he picked up a dark piece of feces, a byproduct of the bears eating blueberries, and found several grayish hairs on a nearby tree. It seemed to be from a grizzly, not his target. He continued but soon found a large footprint, definitely from a grizzly. Steven did not want to encounter a grizzly. Its large size and aggressiveness could easily tear a person apart. He proceeded cautiously, walking up a stream and occasionally using his binoculars. Unexpectedly, he spotted a black bear, instantly exciting him. Seeing the well-fed bear, he couldn't control his excitement and began climbing towards the bear's location. However, the steep and uneven mountain path slowed him down. When he saw fresh berries, he knew he had entered the black bear's territory. He also saw some mountain goats active on the steep mountain tops, tough competitors. Although goat meat is also tasty, his target this time was the black bear. Farther up the mountain, he saw a moving black bear. Steven wasn't sure if it was the same one he had seen before. From his high vantage point, any careless approach could easily alert it. While hesitating, he suddenly saw another bear halfway up the mountain. Now, his target was clear. He quickly chased after it. After a strenuous climb to a high slope, he looked down and sure enough, the bear was still there. Although within shooting range, Steven didn't fire because the bear was on a steep cliff edge above a deep canyon. Retrieving its body if it fell could be uncertain. After hesitating, he decided to abandon the shot. Unexpectedly, the bear started descending the mountain, presenting a rare opportunity. Steven hurried downhill as the bear sped up, likely leading to a meeting point. Amidst this tense atmosphere, Steven kept his eyes on the target and found a higher vantage point just as the bear paused. A bullet then pierced the sky and hit the bear, causing it to run in pain. However, the shot was fatal, and the bear stumbled and rolled down. Steven sat down, calmed his excitement, then approached to confirm the bear was dead. With the sun setting, he faced a tough decision to leave the body overnight and return at dawn to process it. But he needed to remove the entrails to prevent bacteria growth. After parting with the bear, he returned to camp. The Northern Lights, one of the world's most beautiful sights, accompanied him back. The next day, he worried if the body was still there due to the many wild animals around. Seeing crows fly by unsettled him, as they often appear at kill sites. Steven sped up and, using his hands and feet, reached the site to find the bear still there. Relieved, he began butchering. The air was thick with the scent of blood, which could attract grizzly bears. Though the black bear primarily ate berries, it had accumulated a lot of fat. Steven appreciated these fats for their potential to be rendered into healthy and tasty cooking oil. He saw these fats as invaluable treasures not to be wasted. After packing the meat, he shouldered his load and carefully descended due to the weight. Drinking from a mountain spring and resting when tired, he returned to camp in 2 hours. Excited for the next part, he started a fire, took 2 chunks of fat, and sliced them like sushi. He then cut them smaller, placed them in a pot, and cooked them on low heat until the oil seeped out. He then added a slice of red meat from the thigh, cut into thin strips, and cooked it in the pot. As the oil bubbled with the rising temperature, he waited until the meat was cooked. Picking up a piece, its dripping oil whetted his appetite. Steven opened wide and savored the meat, chewing a few times as the flavor filled his mouth, thoroughly enjoying his hearty meal from the bear's fat, which could be rendered into top-quality animal oil. He soon arrived at a wetland in north-central Alaska, home to various birds. Due to the complex terrain, access was possible only by plane or boat, and Steven chose both. His friend Brant, an avian biologist conducting avian flu research in the area, had been waiting for him. After greetings, they set off. Their first task was to find a spot, as ducks have specific activity areas. They simply wandered around to see where ducks would be startled into flight. As they ventured deeper into the waters, the engine's roar spectacularly sent a flock of ducks flying. They chose a spot near the shore and began constructing a blind, using wire mesh to form a circle and decorating it with straw before positioning it near the lake. They then threw prepared duck decoys into the lake, attracting the naturally gregarious ducks. With the lake now dotted with decoys, they set up a wire mesh barrier in front and sat behind it, waiting quietly. After a while, ducks began to appear. When one duck came excitedly, Steven stood to shoot but forgot to disengage the safety, startling the duck away. This mishap embarrassed him, and for a while, no more ducks appeared. They concluded they were too close, so they moved the barrier further away. This strategy worked, and soon a duck glided down. Steven stood and fired, missing the first shot but hitting with the second. Brant sent his dog, which quickly retrieved the duck, marking Steven's first catch of the day, leaving him grinning. The first success soon led to a second, as another duck appeared. Steven shot accurately this time, and again the dog handled the retrieval. Several more ducks appeared, and Brant joined in, showing off his shooting skills. The excitement of hunting in this way filled both men. The gunshots echoed continuously in the wilderness, with the dog working hardest. Brant had a whistle that mimicked duck calls, continuously luring ducks. They began to play tricks, waiting for several ducks to gather before suddenly shooting, catching them off guard. After a while, they had bagged 8 ducks. As the day darkened, they were about to end the hunt when another duck flew in. Steven couldn't pass up the chance and shot again. Although he hit the target, it wasn't fatal. He ran to the shore to take another shot but missed, and he was out of bullets. He had to borrow one from his friend. By the time he reloaded, the duck had disappeared. They couldn't leave the wounded prey, so Brant brought the boat over, and they began searching for the duck but ultimately couldn't find it and had to give up. They packed up and started their return journey. The next day they set out early, but luck was not on their side. Shortly after, the boat's motor stopped. Brant tinkered with it, but couldn't restart it. They dismantled it to find the filter had water in it. After draining the water and reassembling it, the motor started again, and they continued. Eventually they reached their destination, set up their gear, and got busy until daylight. They had just sat down when 2 ducks flew by, one for each, but coincidentally, they both missed, possibly due to the cold numbing their hands. During the wait, Brant continuously mimicked duck calls. Soon, a wild duck eagerly approached. As 2 strong men stood up, the duck tried to fly higher to escape, but was unfortunately hit by a bullet. A large yellow dog quickly retrieved the prey, a fat, meaty mallard. The 2 men swiftly entered hunting mode, taking down many birds. Some birds narrowly escaped, but lone ducks often weren't as lucky. The large yellow dog tirelessly retrieved ducks, and with the excellent teamwork of the 2 men and the dog, their collection visibly grew. After a while, feeling they had hunted enough, they stopped, packed up their gear, and took the dozen ducks they had hunted back with them. Before enjoying their meal, they had important tasks. Brant needed to collect samples to check for avian flu. While he was busy, Steven started plucking feathers. After plucking, he gutted and cleaned the ducks in the river. They decided to cook 2 ducks simply by cutting a slit in the back, inserting the knife, and slicing along the spine to open the duck flat with brute force. Next, they made a cooking rack by inserting it into the ground and using willow branches to skewer the ducks, hanging them on the rack. Cooked over charcoal, the duck meat slowly became tender inside and crispy outside. Steven had to flip them to avoid burning. When Brant arrived, the ducks were nearly done. They began to taste the meat, finding the primitive cooking method surprisingly delicious. They nearly indulged themselves in the aromatic, delicious roast duck, laughing and thoroughly enjoying their meal. Poor large yellow dog, busy for 2 days, only got a little meat. This time he was in Northern California's mountainous region, home to Eurasian wild pigs that were becoming a nuisance. He had a friend running a ranch there, deeply affected by the wild pigs. They dug everywhere and even broke into barns. They seemed unstoppable. Finding wild pigs was easy. Just look near water sources, a daily destination for them. Equipped, they drove out. Known for their fierceness and cunning, hunting these pigs also came with great danger. His friend drove him to a forward cabin, and from there, he had to proceed on foot to avoid scaring the pigs with engine noise. Before setting out, he loaded his bullets and took all precautions. He walked slowly, always observing his surroundings and occasionally using binoculars. The forest had oak trees, a main food source for the pigs, indicating he was in an active pig area. Steven tried to find a water source from a high vantage point and eventually spotted a creek in the valley. Approaching it, he saw signs of wild pig damage. He identified a winding animal trail and followed it uphill. As he entered the forest, a noise ahead startled him. He crouched and looked, seeing leaves shaking in the bushes ahead. He held his breath and waited, but all went silent. It seemed the pig had run off. A typical outcome when a hunter is detected prematurely. Successful hunting requires seizing the initiative. Later, Steven saw no pigs, though he spotted a few deer. However, his target was wild pigs, so he did not disturb the deer. As it grew dark, he had to return to camp. The next morning, he set off again. Reaching a high ground, he used his binoculars but saw no target. He then wandered around, heading southeast for about 3 miles until he spotted something. Quickly using his binoculars again, he saw a wild pig running like a startled rabbit below, with another nearby. Steven observed their direction, suspecting they were heading to the sleeping spot he had found the day before. Confirming their pattern, he decided to take his time planning the next steps. However, by noon, he prepared to shoot a quail to satisfy his hunger. With his shooting skills, he could kill in one shot. After admiring the quail, he pocketed it, gathered some dry wood, and looked for tools at the campsite. He modified an oil drum into a stove, a key for forest fire prevention, as he couldn't risk burning down his friend's ranch. He then plucked the quail, tied it with a wire, and hung it over the drum to roast with charcoal. Half an hour later, a delicious aroma spread, and Steven eagerly tasted the quail. After eating, it was time to hunt the wild pigs. Despite their keen sense of smell, their poor vision meant he could approach carefully by watching the wind direction and possibly catch them sleeping. Getting closer, he smelled the pigs and soon saw them. He raised his rifle, aimed briefly, and fired decisively. Following the shot and the pig's scream as it fled, Steven calmly checked for blood traces, finding some on leaves. He followed the trail, seeing more blood along the way, and found the pig dead not far ahead. Delighted with his catch, he noted the pig's thick old razorback covered in thorns, looking quite formidable. After reflecting, he dragged the pig to a nearby creek for processing. First, he cut along its belly to remove the innards, then cut a branch and tied the pig's neck to it to create a makeshift sled, pulling the pig back to camp. It was a tough journey back, but he didn't rest, starting to butcher immediately. He made holes in the pig's legs, tied them with ropes, and used a heavy stone to stabilize the oil drum, hanging the pig in midair. He quickly skinned the pig and then cut the meat, starting with his favorite part, the tenderloin. Unlike domestic pigs, wild pigs have more lean meat due to their active lifestyle, but their thigh meat is still excellent white meat. After butchering, he looked forward to cooking. He shaped an old metal sheet into a bowl-like form, lit a fire on it, then placed the tenderloin on foil, adding an apple and an onion for a balanced meal, and carefully wrapped it before placing it on the charcoal and covering it with a metal plate weighed down by a stone. After half an hour, he eagerly checked it. Opening the foil, the delicious aroma was immediate. The meat, lean yet tender, melted in his mouth, tasting wonderfully good with the apple and onion. A true gourmet experience. After eating his fill, he would visit his friend's house to share the remaining pork. Today, Steven arrived in the southeastern mountains of Arizona, home to a type of deer known as the Coues white-tailed deer. These deer are small, with males weighing about 100 pounds. Their challenging nature attracts many hunters. The terrain here, mainly rolling hills, is also known as the Sky Islands. Due to the area's uniqueness, Steven enlisted the help of a local friend who knew where to find the deer. They set up binoculars on a high ground and began their vigil. After some time, a deer appeared in view, followed by another. Thanks to his friend's sharp eyesight, Steven hadn't spotted any. These deer are very elusive here. After briefing him, the friend drove away, leaving Steven to hunt alone. He moved to another hilltop and resumed observing. The view below was monotonous, and the small deer were hard to spot. Unfortunately, Steven had no luck and saw no deer by nightfall, reluctantly leaving to find a place to spend the night. The next day, before dawn, he set out again, changing his strategy to a mid-slope location with a view both up and down the hill, hoping for a better outcome. As the sun climbed, he had been watching for a long time without spotting a single deer. Deciding to move, he hadn't gone far when it began to rain. Fortunately, he had brought a raincoat, so he continued on. The weather here is unpredictable, and soon, the rain cleared. However, Steven hadn't found a new observation point yet. He crossed many obstacles and finally reached a high point, entering stealth mode again. Despite the thunder, his focus wasn't disturbed. Eventually, his efforts paid off, and he spotted deer, specifically pairs of Coué's white-tailed deer. But Steven remained seated. A daunting canyon separated them, a bittersweet scenario. As dusk approached, he returned empty-handed again. 2 days of setbacks left him feeling very down, so he forced himself to sleep. The next morning, just as it was getting light, he started working again and soon found 4 white-tailed deer. However, they were moving, and approaching them hastily could scare them off. Steven tried to ascertain where they might settle for the night, but as the situation escalated, the rising sun made it impossible to continue watching the deer. He had to let fate take its course. As the day wore on, he could observe again, but was surprised to see 2 deer fighting intensely. Amused, Steven watched for a while before deciding it was time to take action. He needed to cross 2 canyons, the second resembling the entrance to hell, daunting and intimidating. As he walked, he suddenly stopped. A rattlesnake was eyeing him. Steven picked up a rock and killed it with a hard throw, planning to eat the snake if he couldn't catch a deer. He then approached the second canyon, which was very steep, requiring careful descent. An injury here would be disastrous. Focused, he overcame multiple obstacles and finally reached the valley floor. But his journey wasn't over. He had to climb the wall to the mountaintop. Fortunately, the gentle slope acted like stairs. After great effort, he emerged from the canyon, spotted 2 deer, but was downwind. Their keen sense of smell meant he couldn't catch up. With evening approaching, he decided to spend the night there. Dinner was, of course, snake meat. He cut the snake into pieces, boiled it in water, and added some chili peppers, which greatly enhanced the flavor. After a modest meal, he fell asleep. The next day, his 4th in the area, Steven resumed his work. Located in the deer's active region, he quickly spotted one, although it was at a distance. He decided to approach quietly. Not far along, he unexpectedly found a limping deer in the bushes, likely a loser from a buck fight. Steven approached, crouched, and aimed, intent on a humane, clean kill. The opportunity quickly arose, and he fired decisively. As he slowly approached, he saw the buck had already fallen and stopped breathing. Excited, Steven patted its belly. The young adult buck would likely have tender meat. He dragged the deer to an open area, and then gutted it. Among the deer's organs, he found a lacy-like tissue, which he used to wrap the heart to keep it fresh. After butchering the deer, he proceeded to his favorite part of the process. He arranged some stones to form a stove and lit a fire inside. The dish for the day was an ancient recipe called deer heart corn cake. He took out the ingredients. The fat used for wrapping had dried a bit but still enveloped the heart well. He inserted a stick through it and placed it over the charcoal. After a while, the dripping animal fat sizzled on the fire. The external fat began to char, but the heart inside cooked gradually. Watching this, Steven's mouth watered. He patiently waited, then took out 2 prepared cakes. After a few more moments, feeling the time was right, he sliced open the outer layer to reveal the tender heart, steaming hot. He sliced the heart, carefully placed it on the cakes, and added some onions and small hot peppers for flavor. The key ingredient was a special fiery sauce. He rolled up the cake and took a big bite. The taste was excellent, and he fell deeply in love with this delicacy. After eating his fill, he packed up his trophies and started his return journey. Soon, he arrived in the Big Bend area of Texas, one of the world's most rugged places, home to a type of mountain goat considered one of the hardest animals to catch. Originally from North Africa, they were brought to the USA and have now settled in these mountains. Steven's plan was to find a safe shelter first, and he was in luck as he quickly found a natural cave. From the remains inside, it appeared someone had camped there before. With his rear secured, he packed his backpack, took his rifle, and went into work mode. As he walked, he used his binoculars to scan the area. Although he hadn't spotted any game yet, he knew where he was headed, the steep peak ahead. After a tremendous effort, he reached the summit and found some goat droppings, confirming he was in the right place. Steven began examining the ground traces, trying to figure out their direction of departure. Unfortunately, the tracks were too complex to discern a clear path, so he took out his binoculars to observe again. But all was silent, with no sign of animal life. This unexpectedly desolate wilderness was something he had never encountered before. As dusk fell, he reluctantly ended his hunting trip. The next day, as the sun rose, Steven once again embarked on his quest to find the mountain goats. Today, he finally spotted some wildlife, which lifted his spirits. He carefully climbed to the top of the mountain, only to make a surprising discovery: a large bloodstain on the rocks, likely from a bird of prey tearing apart its prey. After reflecting on this, he took out his binoculars for a long observation. His eyes grew weary over time, but he still saw no goats, indicating this method was ineffective. Feeling hungry, he remembered spotting some quails earlier, so he switched to a shotgun suitable for bird hunting and began searching the area. Soon he found one and shot it down, quickly retrieving the prey. He immediately set up a fire, took out a pan, and prepared sweet potatoes, onions, and peppers, using animal fat as oil. He stir-fried these side dishes first. Once ready, he added the whole quail, covered the pan, and patiently waited. After half an hour, he added some salt, chili, and pepper to enhance the flavor. When the quail was finally ready, it looked delicious. Adhering to his principle of saving the best for last, Steven started with the onions to stimulate his taste buds before slowly savoring the tender, perfectly cooked quail, giving it his highest praise. After a satisfying meal, he resumed his observation, and perhaps luck was turning, as he finally spotted a family of goats, a sight he had waited 2 days to see. Overwhelmed with emotion, Steven crouched and quietly approached the goats moving towards the valley. He realized he couldn't blindly follow them any longer as dusk approached, leaving him little time. Although they were still far away, missing this chance might mean not seeing the goats again tomorrow, so he considered taking a risk. However, after aiming for a long time, he decided against it as the sunlight faded too quickly, preventing a guaranteed humane kill. He didn't want the animal to suffer a painful death, if only wounded. Returning to his shelter, he endured a tough night. The following day, the weather worsened, with cold winds blowing, which was unfavorable for hunting. Surprisingly, after only a short observation, Steven spotted a young male goat, possibly ostracized from its group. He rushed towards it and, getting closer, began to crawl forward to avoid alerting the goat. However, just as he was strategizing his approach, the distance between them grew again. Steven was puzzled until he saw several other goats driving the one ahead away. Unintentionally, they disrupted his hunting. At this point, he decided to go all out, climbing directly to the mountaintop to see if he could encounter other goats. The path was treacherously steep. A misstep could be fatal. With cautious maneuvers, he safely reached the summit and used his binoculars to find a few goats moving towards a higher peak. The opportunity was right there. Steven crouched and aimed, but the high winds and the goats' fast movement made it impossible to find a shot. He had to reluctantly give up. The severe weather had a disastrous effect on his hunting. Though reluctant to admit it, he had to accept that his hunting trip was a complete failure. The plan to hunt mountain goats ended in failure. Unwilling to leave, Steven shifted his focus to another type of animal, the collared peccary, also known as the javelina. Smaller in size, with the average male weighing about 50 kilograms, javelinas are known for their toughness and ferocity. Given the proximity to the Mexican border, an area active with drug traffickers, he decided not to use firearms for safety reasons and opted for a traditional weapon, bow and arrow for hunting. After some searching, he found an excellent refuge, a natural cave indented in a rock wall adorned with some paintings indicating previous campers. However, after inspection, he felt the cave might collapse at any moment. For safety, he chose to set up a tent on stable ground instead. With his shelter secured, it was time to hunt. Although often called wild pigs, javelinas are not true pigs. They have tusk-like sharp teeth, but their hoof prints resemble those of wild pigs. Steven soon found tracks, boosting his morale as it confirmed he was within the javelina's active range. He moved to a high ground for a better vantage point. Although patient as the sun set, he had not spotted any game and had to return to camp for the night, settling for freeze-dried food. This sparked an idea in him, on how to prepare javelina meat. The next day, he returned early to the same lookout in hopes of seeing javelinas feeding. Unfortunately, thick fog obscured his view and disrupted his plans. Now he had to wander aimlessly, hoping for luck. Javelinas are most active in the early morning and at dusk, their feeding times, and they eat almost anything. While pondering, he noticed some fresh tracks on the ground. Following these, he came upon a rocky area with many caves, clearly showing signs of javelinas overnighting. And nearby, he found more evidence, including javelina bones. Proceeding further, aware of the javelina's poor vision but keen hearing, Steven moved slowly and quietly. Soon, he spotted a small puddle with fresh javelina tracks. Looking around, he saw nothing, so he moved to another high point. Suddenly, he thought he heard sounds like animals chewing. Following the noise, he spotted several javelinas feeding. Choosing to approach from downwind, Steven quietly got closer and began stringing his bow as the javelinas remained unaware. The distance between them gradually closed. Just as Steven was about to shoot, one javelina sensed danger, turned its sexy butt, and dashed away, leaving Steven frustrated by the missed opportunity. He followed slowly, hoping for another chance. Persistence paid off, and Steven finally got a face-to-face opportunity with a javelina. Seizing the moment, he drew his bow in one fluid motion and decisively released the arrow at the target. The wounded javelina bolted frantically. Steven reached where the javelina had stood, found the arrow with blood on it, and saw blood drops on the ground. He decided to lie down and let the javelina run for a while. After losing blood for over an hour, it would naturally succumb to its injuries. After enough time had passed, Steven got up and followed the blood trail. It led him far until he found the javelina lying on the ground, bleeding from the mouth, dead beyond doubt. Steven was ecstatic. He pried open the javelina's mouth, exposing its sharp tusks, which looked terrifying. The thought of having hunted such a fearsome beast with a bow and arrow filled him with deep pride. The javelina's claws were also peculiar, having two bendable nails, but even stranger was a scent gland on its back, which emits an unpleasant liquid when threatened, earning it the nickname skunk pig. After reflecting on this, it was time to process the javelina. He took out a small knife, slid open its belly, removed the organs, and then strapped it to his backpack, stepping happily onto the return journey. Next came the part he was most looking forward to. He planned to use an ancient indigenous American cooking method that he had only read about in books and was trying for the first time. He started a fire and found some porous lava rocks, placing them in the fire. He cut a prime piece of pork and the stomach from the prey, cleaned the stomach, and prepared it as a makeshift cooking pot. After everything was ready, he dug a hole in the ground and collected some cacti, arranging them around the rim of the hole. He placed the stomach filled with water into the hole and secured its edges with hooks nailed into the cacti to prevent it from falling out. He then sliced the meat and added it to the water. The crucial part of the cooking process followed. He poured the heated lava rocks into the stomach, causing the water to boil and cook the meat, an indigenous version of a hot pot. Watching the bubbling scene, he anticipated the outcome. As the water cooled, he added new rocks to maintain a high temperature. After about 15 minutes, he felt it was time. He removed the rocks and punched a few holes in the bottom of the stomach to drain the water. Steven tasted a piece of the meat. It was tender and delicious. The pure, unadulterated flavor fascinated him deeply. This hunting trip had ended perfectly. He recently arrived at the Alaska Peninsula to chase a legendary goat living at the ice-capped summit. These goats, rarely having any predators, have tender and delicious meat, attracting gourmet hunters willing to risk it all. In Alaska, non-residents can hunt goats only if they are licensed outfitters or direct relatives of local residents. Steven meets neither criterion, but luckily his brother Danny qualifies. They set off together, parking at the mountain base, and then heading into the mountains fully equipped. Due to Danny's busy schedule, they had only 2 days, so they would return on time regardless of the hunt's outcome. The steep mountain was covered in thick bushes. To save time, they planned their route uphill. While using binoculars, they unexpectedly spotted a goat at mid-altitude, a rare sight at such a low elevation. Steven used a more precise binocular to try to determine the goat's gender, aiming for a male. Unfortunately, the distance made it hard to discern. Deciding to get closer, they were cautious, knowing the treacherous path had claimed hunters annually. They overcame numerous obstacles and reached the base of the peak, but the real challenge began with moss-covered rocks making the ascent slippery. They leaned forward, slowed their pace, and carefully climbed to a safe area. Upon spotting the goat again, they realized it was a female, which had already noticed them and moved higher up. Their path was now covered with snow, slowing them down significantly. Looking up, they saw the goat at the summit, at least an hour away by their pace. After resting briefly, they continued climbing but saw no more goats in the next few hours as the sun set. They decided to camp outdoors and resume the hunt the next morning. Avoiding deep snowy areas, they walked through dense vegetation. After miles, they finally spotted a goat on a dangerous cliff. Using binoculars, they observed 4 goats, including a male. Reaching them required crossing 2 deep ravines. After planning, they moved, constantly checking the goats, which remained but seemed aware and tense. Preferring not to shoot without certainty and risk losing the goat over a cliff, they held their position, trying to ease the goat's suspicions. After a fruitless wait and no chance to get closer, they decided to circle around and approach from another direction. Reaching a new vantage point, they conducted a thorough search and spotted the goats again. Now sure of their target, they prepared to proceed lightly. After rearranging their equipment, the 2 resolutely headed up the mountain. Although aware of the difficulty of climbing snow-capped mountains, they only fully realized the challenge once they faced it. They soon became breathless from the climb, but the good news was they were close to the goats, which were still unaware of the danger. They saw a great opportunity to succeed. Steven was about to shoot when Danny urgently stopped him. He noticed something odd about the male goat. Although robust, its horns seemed too thin, more like those of a female. After closely observing and drawing on his years of hunting experience, Steven had to accept that they were all females. Disappointed by this realization, the 2 felt like crying after all their efforts led to this outcome. The goats, standing at the highest point, seemed to silently mock them. Steven wanted to shoot one in frustration, but wisdom told him to restrain himself. They had no choice but to pack up their equipment and start the return journey. Sometimes hunting is like this, not always smooth, but that's part of its allure. You never know the outcome until the last moment. Later, Steven traveled to southeastern Montana, home to mule deer 3 times the size of regular deer but with tastier meat. Having lived in Montana for 10 years, Steven knew exactly where to find this game. This time he wasn't alone, but teamed up with his brother Matt and friend Mosum. Matt had prepared a transport team of llamas, as the rugged mountain paths were impassable by vehicle and only llamas could carry the supplies. After a successful hunt, they would also transport the deer meat. After walking several miles, it got dark, and they camped overnight, spending a memorable night. The next morning, before dawn, they got up early and each chose a direction to start their hunting journey, leaving the llamas at the camp. Steven planned to walk along the ridge line, hoping to encounter deer. After searching, he noticed deer tracks everywhere in the snow and identified a mule deer trail, which he followed. Reaching a high point, he used his binoculars for a better view, and luckily spotted 2 mule deer. Steven controlled his excitement and set up his rifle. However, a doe was right in front of the buck, preventing him from shooting for fear of hitting her. Soon, as the doe walked away, Steven prepared to shoot, but the buck followed her, causing him to miss his chance again. Cursing under his breath, he continued to look for another opportunity. Suddenly, a magpie landed on the buck's back, creating a surreal and comical scene. More interestingly, a coyote appeared in the distance, also eyeing the mule deer. The alert buck sensed the unusual atmosphere, and all 3 forces unexpectedly converged, causing a sigh of amazement. The balance was quickly disrupted when the doe lost her composure and fled the scene. As Steven felt deflated and chilled from waiting in the snow for 20 minutes, his chance was ruined by the coyote. At that moment, he felt unprecedented anger, but with no other choice, he continued searching for his target. As luck would have it, Steven spotted 3 mule deer again. Just as he was about to act, a cold wind blew, and the buck disappeared. Steven guessed it might still be on the other side of the ridge. He decided to go around the side, hoping to catch it off guard. Despite the obstacles, He reached his destination and used his binoculars to spot the deer below. Steven approached slowly and found a good position, only to see two does. The buck was nowhere to be found. While moving and searching, his efforts paid off, and he spotted the buck again. However, perhaps his movements were too loud, and he scared the buck away, leaving only falling snowflakes where it had been. Frustrated by his wasted effort, and with darkness setting in, he had no chance to hunt again and had to return to camp. The next day, the weather worsened with falling snow and reduced visibility. Not ideal for hunting. However, embracing the challenge, Steven set out to find deer. Despite the difficulties posed by the heavy snow, it helped distinguish the freshness of tracks. Steven found some recent messy tracks and followed them to find several deer. He was downwind and in fog, allowing him to approach boldly. Getting closer, he slowly raised his rifle. The buck was unaware of the danger. Quickly, Steven took his shot. With the sound of the gun, the buck fell, stunning the nearby does. After calming his excitement, he returned to camp, brought a llama, and hurried to transport the deer before it froze. After a delay, the deer was covered in thick snow. Steven swiftly butchered the deer, removing the tarsal gland to avoid tainting the meat with its strange odor. Then, he sawed the bones and cut a tender piece from the loin, the most delicious part, perfect for immediate consumption. He then packed the meat and led the llama back, feeling exceptionally content, not just from the successful hunt, but also from the thrill of victory. Next, he eagerly anticipated cooking. He sliced the meat, melted snow in a pot for stewing, and prepared various vegetables by peeling and adding them to the pot with some spices, slowly stewing them into a rich soup. After some time, Matt also returned with a full load, drawn by the smell of the stew and eager to eat. As night fell, they gathered around the fire for a culinary feast. They celebrated the hunt with a stew made from the deer's loin, potatoes, carrots, and other vegetables, using snow for water, enjoying a delicious meal together. Steven came to southwestern Wisconsin, home to cottontail rabbits known for their tender and delicious meat. He also aimed to hunt deer and squirrels, planning to create a mixed meat feast. Steven visited a friend's farm, where generations have lived and managed the surrounding woodlands. Under careful management, the white-tailed deer population had grown, but they needed to be controlled each spring to prevent overpopulation. Steven was invited to join this effort. As preparations were made, 5 hunters entered the woods to drive the deer towards the waiting area, where Doug and Steven positioned themselves. Soon, a large group of deer burst out. Steven tried to shoot, but the deer were too fast and he missed his chance. All hopes were now on Doug. Suddenly, a group of deer dashed out, and Doug, caught off guard, was fortunate as 4 deer stopped briefly. After aiming, he fired. The shot scared the deer off, but Doug was confident he had hit one. He approached the spot and confirmed the kill to the others. They found the buck and decided to process it on the spot, quickly gutting and removing the innards before dragging it back, completing the first phase of their hunt. Next, they targeted cottontail rabbits, which became more active as the temperature rose. Switching to appropriate firearms and ammunition, they ventured into the wilderness where rabbit tracks littered the bushes. They decided to drive the rabbits out, a method that proved effective when Doug quickly spotted a rabbit. Unfortunately, he missed, amusing the group as they laughed at the spectacle. The hunting continued with continuous gunfire as everyone showcased their shooting skills. Steven stood out, nearly achieving a perfect shot rate, and they bagged 8 rabbits. The second phase was now complete, and they cleaned the rabbits by skinning and chopping the meat for storage. Steven, eager to try more game, set his sights on squirrels. Armed, he and Doug headed to a small woodland. Steven mimicked squirrel calls, hoping to lure them. After a wait, saw only cows pass by. They moved deeper and waited under a tree. Soon, a squirrel, attracted by the call, approached. Doug aimed and shot it down, earning praise from Steven as they collected their first squirrel of the day. Their luck continued as another squirrel appeared. Doug fired twice, successfully taking it down. With 2 squirrels, they had enough to meet their needs and returned home with their bounty. Steven processed the squirrel and then began to prepare his dish. First, he marinated the ingredients. He poured equal parts apple cider vinegar and water into a bucket, adding some spices, salt, and chopped onions. After stirring everything until well mixed, he placed the rabbit and squirrel meat in the mixture to marinate overnight. The next day, as the sun rose, Steven got busy. The meat was flavorful after marinating overnight. He first patted the meat dry, then coated it with flour and placed it in a hot frying pan. When he flipped it, he found it had turned golden brown, looking and smelling delicious. Steven enjoyed the cooking process immensely. After frying all the meat, he added some broth and finished with a high heat to thicken the sauce, enhancing the flavor. To cut through the richness, he prepared some onions. As the broth was nearly ready, he thickened it by crushing ginger snap cookies into crumbs and stirring them into the pot. At this point, the first dish was ready to serve. Next, he started on the second dish. Steven and Doug went to the barn where a deer was hanging. They quickly butchered it, and Steven picked several tender pieces from the hind legs, which he marinated with spices. He then took the meat outside to grill on a rack. While Steven was busy, others sat on the couch chatting and waiting. Their patience paid off with a delicious dinner arriving in stages. They eagerly tasted it, finding the flavor incredibly satisfying, a new and thrilling experience for them. The group exclaimed with delight and joyously devoured their meal together. This time, Steven came to southeastern Montana with his brother Matt, ready to hunt turkeys. During this season, turkeys are considered one of the most delicious foods. The two, leading their llamas, ventured into the wilderness, their laughter indicating their good spirits. However, the weather soon turned as snow began to fall, potentially impacting their hunting plans. They set up camp in an open area and split up to scout different directions with only an hour of daylight left. Their goal was not just to hunt, but to look for signs of turkey activity. They didn't see any turkeys, but stumbled upon several elks, which amused Steven, as he often couldn't find them when he actually wanted to hunt them. After voicing his frustration, he continued searching and suddenly stopped, hearing the sound of voracious eating. He cautiously approached the source of the noise, and upon entering a small grove he became extra careful, sensing he was near turkey activity. Hiding behind a stump, Steven used a call tool to mimic turkey sounds. Soon, a real turkey responded from the bushes. As he was about to raise his shotgun, a turkey head popped out, startling him. However, Steven remained calm and waited for the right moment. When the turkey moved into an open view, he decisively shot it. The turkey flapped a few times before dying, giving Steven a rush of exhilaration, as the hunt turned out to be unexpectedly smooth. Approaching the turkey, he admired its beautiful plumage, indicating it was a mature male. He couldn't help but admire his catch again before he headed back to camp, walking triumphantly like a victorious general. Back at camp, Matt shared his own experience. He had hidden in the bushes, mimicking turkey calls, which surprisingly attracted a coyote. They stared at each other, unsure of what to do next, until the coyote finally scampered off, cursing. Matt's story amused Steven, adding humor to their adventure. Next, they prepared dinner. Steven cut open the turkey, removed its gizzard, peeled off the tough skin, and prepared the edible parts. He then cut various organs, placed them together, added water to a pot, and began to simmer them on low heat. After 15 minutes, the organs were cooked, and Steven added some chili peppers for flavor. The two tasted it, enjoying the freshness. After their meal, they planned the next day's activities, deciding to hunt in different directions again. As night fell, they slept soundly. The next morning, they set out early. Steven returned to the previous day's spot, while Matt, following his intuition, headed south. Finding a high spot, Matt settled in and mimicked turkey calls while staying highly alert to distant sounds. His patience paid off as a turkey strutted over, emitting mating calls. Understanding the situation, Matt greeted it with a shot, and the turkey died on its mating journey. He approached, played with its feathers, removed the innards, and hid them under a tree before continuing his hunt. Meanwhile, Steven also spotted 2 turkeys. He lay down to avoid detection, knowing that the best way to hunt turkeys, given their poor vision but sharp hearing, is to let them come closer, increasing the chances of a successful hunt. Under his strategy, 2 turkeys were moving in his direction. Steven silently raised his gun, and just as the turkeys stopped, the gunshot shattered the silence. The tom turkey fell dead, and Steven slowly exhaled, feeling a pang of pity as he watched the hen run away. After she was out of sight, he approached, picked up the heavy turkey, and plucked the feathers from its belly. He made an incision, removed the innards into a bag, and then tied the turkey to his backpack to start the journey back. Returning to camp, he hung the turkey alongside the one from the previous day. After some time, Matt returned with 2 more turkeys, and both were thrilled with their successful hunt. They got straight to work, plucking the feathers from the turkeys. Afterward, Steven started a fire, anticipating the next part of their feast. He cut the fatty rear off the turkey, wrapped it in foil, and gently pounded it with a stone to tenderize the meat. He then seasoned it with chili powder, coated it with breadcrumbs, and fried it in oil until it was golden brown and crispy. Steven then cut a lemon into slices and arranged them, placing the fried turkey on top to infuse it with the citrus flavor. Dinner was ready, and they eagerly tasted it. The turkey was crispy on the outside, tender on the inside, and carried a refreshing hint of lemon. They enjoyed the meal immensely, finding themselves deeply indulged in the culinary delight. The turkey hunt had ended perfectly. Months later, Steven arrived in southeastern Arizona to pursue the king of the mountain, the mountain lion. He teamed up with 2 experienced lion hunters, Green and Mitchell, who had trained a pack of loyal and fierce hounds. For nearly 30 years, these 2 had been a nightmare for mountain lions. A large ranch in the area suffered yearly attacks from over a dozen lions, making it their job to protect the livestock. Despite their efforts, the ranch still lost about 50 cattle last year. Since Steven knew little about mountain lions, Green gave him a crash course, such as how to distinguish between dog and lion tracks. The lion's paw is wider, and the toes differ. After the lesson, they began looking for more signs. They soon spotted a clear footprint, which Green determined was made a day or 2 before. Nearby, they found a deer carcass, devoured except for the head, a grim reminder of the predator they were dealing with. Excited about the next day's hunt, Steven barely slept. At dawn, the hounds were ready to track the mountain lion and corner it against rocks or trees for the hunters to shoot with pistols, chosen for their portability and stopping power. The hunt began, and the dogs picked up the scent. The hunters followed slowly as signs of the lion's presence increased. The dogs, with their sensitive noses, could detect faint odors left on rocks. As more dogs began to bark, indicating frequent lion activity in the area, they faced a challenging task of discerning fresh tracks from the day before to determine the lion's escape route. This process could take from half an hour to half a day, requiring the lion hunters to be very patient. Fortunately, their luck held as the hounds formed a line and sprinted off, having secured a direction. Led by the lead dog, they chased after the lion's location. However, the good times didn't last. After climbing to a rocky peak, the dogs became confused. Realizing they shouldn't waste more time there, the hunters led the hounds deeper into the territory. After an afternoon of searching without any sightings, they reluctantly gave up the hunt. That night, Steven felt incredibly disappointed, lying in bed unable to sleep for a long time. Time flies, and 3 months later, Steven returned to the same location, ready to continue his previous challenge. He teamed up again with the 2 lion hunters, bringing along their most elite pack of hounds, each skilled in combat. After some searching, they spotted a set of fresh tracks, indicating an active mountain lion in the area, which greatly boosted their morale. The hunting dogs, particularly excited, sniffed ahead, but as time passed, they still had not found anything. Steven's spirits sank, worried about repeating past failures. However, Green soon shared some good news. The hound team had cornered a mountain lion. When Steven arrived, he realized it was a misunderstanding. The youngest hound had mistaken a young bear for a lion, which was somewhat amusing. They continued their search for a mountain lion in the volcanic terrain, where higher temperatures made scent tracking a challenge. When they reached a rocky summit, the dogs started barking again, indicating that a lion had spent the night there, but now the trail seemed to vanish. Steven, observing the challenging terrain they had traversed, felt the difficulty of the lion hunters' task. Despite their efforts, they hadn't even seen a lion, making it a tough hunt. With daylight dwindling, they reluctantly ended their day's journey. Although dissatisfied with the outcome, Steven appreciated the resilience shown, which was the greatest takeaway from this experience, along with a bit of self-consolation. After some rest, Steven traveled to the southern border of the United States, prepared to hunt American bison, a creature weighing over 1,000 pounds and the largest mammal in North America. Even wolves hesitate to provoke them. Here in the vast Sonoran Desert, characterized by sparse vegetation, cattle ranching thrived. The local ranch competed with the roaming bison herds, tolerating their presence but ensuring they remained within manageable limits. Today, Steven was permitted to hunt an adult bison, but unfamiliar with the terrain, he had to search blindly for signs of them. Currently, North America hosts about 500,000 bison, 94% of which live on or are owned by private lands. In this area, about 100 bison descended from 10 cows, and one bull released 35 years ago, roaming tens of thousands of acres. As Steven moved, he used his binoculars to scan the area. As the day grew hotter, he felt on the verge of dehydration. Jokingly, he thought he'd rather chase bison in swimwear due to the extreme heat, which seemed only suitable for birds patrolling the skies. Despite his complaints, his persistence paid off, and he finally spotted the bison. To avoid startling them, he immediately crouched down and set up a high-powered telescope for a closer look. The bison were now visible in more detail, but Steven still didn't make a move. Given the intense heat, the internal organs could expand before skinning, affecting the meat's quality. The wise approach was to watch the animals until the evening when the weather cooled. As the minutes and seconds painfully dragged on, Steven endured the heat while keeping his eyes fixed on the bison, afraid they might escape. Under this arduous and painful wait, 4 p.m. finally arrived, and it was time to act. He readied his weapon and selected a target, waiting for the bison to stand up to clearly distinguish one. Steven judged that when the shadows covered the herd, they would stand up and start feeding. After a short wait, his prediction proved correct. He put away his binoculars and took out his rifle, silently aiming. Soon he spotted a target, and without its knowledge, pulled the trigger. The bison fell instantly while the gunshot scared the others, causing them to scatter. Steven took a deep breath, calmed his excitement, and continued observing. These bison were aggressive and wild. A charge from them could trample one into mush. After waiting until the herd moved away from the site, Steven cautiously approached. The bison was a young female, much smaller than a bull but with tenderer meat that tasted better. This meat would be enough to fill his freezer. First, he cut the cow's neck to drain the blood. After a wait, he began his work, taking out a small knife to slowly peel off the hide from the ankles. After this step, he dismembered the limbs and hung the legs on a nearby tree. The meat was of excellent quality, lean and satisfying. Steven sped up, hanging each leg on the tree to cool them quickly, ensuring the meat's deliciousness. He then cut the loin and hump, his favorite parts. As the sun set, 3 hours since the hunt began, Steven still had much work left due to the bison's large size. The physical effort was draining, but he dared not stop for rest, as wild animals could be attracted by the smell of blood. After more busy work, he finally finished butchering the bison and was famished. He started a fire, cut a small piece of liver, and grilled it on the coals, turning it once. Soon, the liver was cooked, and Steven enjoyed its raw taste. After eating, he took out his sleeping bag and immediately fell asleep. The next day, refreshed, Steven woke up and prepared to transport the meat down the mountain. Since he couldn't do it alone, he called for help. The ranch owner brought some horses. They took the meat down, packed it into bags, and during this time, Steven cut the bison's tongue to use for a dish, and they split the head, a valuable resource. They packed everything and began their return journey. Back at the ranch, the owner showed Steven how to preserve the meat. They carefully sliced it thin, salted it, and let it dry in the sun for 2 to 3 days. The dry local climate was perfect for this process. They hung the meat high up, mainly to keep it away from dogs. Over time, the meat turned into jerky, which could be pounded into powder and mixed with water to make a tasty snack. After the hard work, it was time to relax with a dinner featuring grilled meat. They made many cuts in the beef, set up a grill, and slow roasted it over charcoal. Meanwhile, the farm's chef prepared a type of flatbread with bison tongue filling. Another favorite dish of Steven's was beef heart corn cakes, made by frying the heart with tomatoes, onions, and peppers, and eating it wrapped in cornbread. After their careful preparation, a rich dinner was ready. They gathered to enjoy the feast, everyone relishing the meal. It was a joyful evening. This time, he came to the South Island mountain ranges of New Zealand, prepared to hunt the elusive red deer. The South Island's mountains, characterized by glaciers, highlands, and rolling grasslands, are home to numerous wild animals. Among them, red deer, an introduced species from 19th century Europe, have proliferated due to the lack of natural predators. Thus, hunters are needed to control their numbers. Mathieu invited a local friend, Rémi, a guide who explained the area's terrain to Steven, and then drove him into the mountains. Along the way, Rémi mentioned another wild animal, the sheep, known for its equally delicious meat. The two planned to first hunt a lamb for food over the next few days. Reaching the high mountains, they saw a river in the valley with a few sheep nearby. Steven aimed to hit a lamb in the head, using his friend as a support. After aiming briefly, he shot at a brown lamb. They approached to check and found a well-sized lamb hit in the shoulder. They moved to an open area to gut it, removing the innards and tying it to the front of the car before deciding to continue up the mountain. It took some effort, but they finally reached the summit and unloaded their gear. His friend said goodbye and started back. With a few hours until dark, Steven quickly set up his tent, then skinned and packed the lamb meat to protect it from flies. Afterward, he went out to scout the area. As an outsider, he knew nothing about the place and needed more observation to plan properly for the next day. Night fell quickly, and though he saw nothing, he gained some understanding of the terrain. The next day, a thick fog suddenly reduced visibility. Steven went to the highest point of the mountain to wait for the weather to improve. Unfortunately, the fog only thickened over hours, forcing him to change his plans and wander around after descending in search of game. After some time, Steven heard some noises ahead but couldn't identify them. He approached slowly, but his footsteps startled whatever was there, causing it to run away. Frustrated but understanding that it was not a good day for hunting, he returned to camp to eat the lamb. He tied a leg to a tree and roasted it over an open fire. As the heat increased, the dripping fat looked delicious. Once the leg's surface was charred, he stopped, tore off a piece, sprinkled it with chili powder, and began to savor it. The lamb was incredibly tender, almost melting in his mouth. Steven marveled, considering it one of the best meats he had ever eaten. The next day, as the fog finally cleared, Steven admired the scenery while starting his quest for red deer. He traversed various terrains and continuously used his binoculars. Over the next few hours, he saw several deer, but no red deer. It wasn't until midday that he spotted a young male red deer. Energized, Steven planned his approach to get closer to the target. However, halfway there, he encountered a problem. The ridge's peak was crowded with deer watching him intently. A direct approach would easily startle them, alerting the red deer to the danger. Steven decided to observe their reactions, which unfortunately seemed agitated, with some deer even making warning sounds. At this point, he had no choice but to back off and take a completely different, longer route which would take hours, but it was his only option. Before starting, he filled a bottle with water from a stream and began the long, tiresome journey. Fortunately, Steven's luck was good today. By the time he arrived at the spot, the deer was still there, resting. He carefully observed and waited patiently for an opportunity while adjusting his rifle. As he hoped, the deer eventually stood up. Steven slowly raised his gun, and seeing the deer lift its head, he decisively fired. However, the shot seemed to miss. Startled, the deer bounced a few times, then stopped. Just as Steven was about to fire again, a scene unfolded that took him by surprise. A huge deer emerged from the bushes, capturing Steven's attention. He wanted to hunt this larger deer, but having already fired once, he needed to ensure the first deer would fall. While he waited, the surviving deer ran off to a farther place. Reluctantly, Steven watched them leave. He then went to check on the first deer and found it already down. Looking at its large antlers, Steven was impressed by the size of the animal he had defeated. After admiring it, he cut open the deer's belly, removed the organs, and cut a tender piece of loin meat. As it was getting dark, and there were no wild beasts in the area, he felt safe leaving the deer there to return for it the next day. Back at camp, it was completely dark. He started making dinner, slicing a pumpkin he had prepared earlier, adding the deer meat, and sprinkling some seasoning. He then added water and cooked it over the fire. After a while, dinner was ready. Lifting the lid, a delicious aroma spread, whetting his appetite. Steven eagerly tasted it. The deer meat was tender, the pumpkin sweet, and together, they enhanced each other's flavors. He thoroughly enjoyed his meal. The next day, he would return home with his prey, very satisfied with the hunt.
Some of that. I'm telling you.
Mesquite.
We want to get, there you go. It's getting gone.
While our coyote is starting to look good, a bite of it can change your luck. Perfectly cooked as it's ever gonna get.
The man named Steven is a full-time hunter and a gourmet. Today, he arrived in the southern part of western Montana and hired 3 alpacas to carry supplies. They planned to venture deep into the forest in search of a mysterious deer, an area also known as cougar territory. For safety, the group was larger than usual and brought various supplies and a van. They drove on the highway until dusk, before entering a forest trail and spent the night in the van. After a simple dinner, they slept through the night. In the morning, they struggled out of their sleeping bags, replenished their nutrients, and started organizing their gear. Each backpack weighed about 20 pounds and was balanced on the sides of the alpacas to prevent them from falling on the mountainous path. Once everything was prepared, they set off fully armed, leading the alpacas. This area is a public hunting ground, implying fierce competition. However, Steven was familiar with the area and led his team to avoid other hunters. The group walked several miles on relatively flat ground, making crunching sounds on the snow. Although it sounded beautiful, the hard snow was uncomfortable for their feet. The photographers had the hardest time, carrying heavy backpacks and cameras and constantly filming. They soon approached a steep mountain path, checked the alpacas' packs, and tightened them before starting the climb. After a great effort, they crossed the ridge and entered a flat area again. Their first task was to set up a camp and then have something to eat. Afterward, they went out to find their prey. Shortly, Steven spotted deer tracks and human footprints in the snow, indicating that other hunters were also tracking the deer. Additionally, there were cougar paw prints nearby, complicating the situation. While identifying these tracks, a deer suddenly appeared in the distance. Steven crouched to aim, but realized it was a young deer likely near its herd. To avoid alerting the herd, he decided to bypass it. After some time, he reached higher ground to observe from above, but saw nothing. As the sun was setting, they had to end the day's hunt. After a few hours of sleep, they woke up again and set out before sunrise, waiting on high ground for mule deer to appear. The silence was unnerving, and after sitting for several hours without seeing anything, Steven felt discouraged. The waiting was emotionally draining, so he decided to take action and see if he could encounter a deer herd. This decision proved right as he found fresh tracks of a deer that had passed by earlier that morning. Following the tracks for several miles without finding the deer, he stopped again to use a telescope for a thorough search. Steven no longer felt the initial enthusiasm, finding it hard to believe how scarce the deer were in this primitive wilderness. After 2 days of poor rest, they were all physically and mentally exhausted. One of the photographers questioned if it was still worth waiting, expressing his hunger. Although Steven wanted to continue hunting, he had to face reality and respect everyone's opinions. It seemed they had to return empty-handed. Reluctantly, they headed back. So this episode, like me, ends in loneliness. Hunting tests one's luck. Not ready to give up, Steven shifted his focus to another local animal, the common deer. Before they could leave, the alpacas made noises, expressing their dissatisfaction after a tiring 2 days. Once everything was ready, they set off again. Upon arriving at the mountain, the first task was to set up camp. Then, 2 photographers joined Steven as they ventured deep into the hunting zone to survey the area. A few years ago, Steven had seen several deer in a burned area, and he wanted to start his observation there. Post-fire environments often become lush, making them excellent feeding spots for wildlife. After some time, they reached the spot, and Steven used his binoculars to spot a doe. Nearby, there was another deer, confirming the area as a prime location teeming with deer. Steven quickly identified a target, a young adult male deer with tender meat, making it an ideal choice. The group, excited by the sight, sensed the delicious potential of deer meat and became eager to proceed. After studying the map, they began walking along the surrounding mountain trails, trying to stay out of the deer's line of sight to approach it quickly. Along the way, Steven found a deer antler, a serendipitous find as antlers can be sold. He packed it into his backpack and continued on. After navigating through some bushes, Steven used his binoculars again, but the deer had vanished. Not ready to give up, he decided to move closer. He followed a dry riverbed up the mountain slowly. At mid-slope, he spotted the same male deer within shooting range. Using his backpack as a support, Steven adjusted the scope's focus. However, the buck joined a herd, preventing Steven from taking a shot to avoid hitting other deer. Soon, an opportunity arose as the deer stood alone on a rock, presenting a clear shot. Steven pulled the trigger, and at the moment of impact, the deer bolted and quickly disappeared. Steven hurried after it and soon found the deer on the backside of the ridge, no longer breathing. He dragged it to an open area and admired it for a moment. As dusk approached, the group debated how to handle the deer. They decided to process it in the dark, turning on their headlamps. Steven began by slicing open the deer's belly, using an axe to break the pelvis, removing the innards, skinning it, and cutting off the scent glands on the legs, which smelled quite strong. Despite washing his hands repeatedly with snow, the stench lingered. Steven then quartered the deer, packed it up, and carried it back, a difficult task at night, especially with the added weight. However, the joy of the hunt uplifted their spirits. They returned to camp and started preparing dinner. Steven tenderized some loin meat by pounding it with the side of an axe before frying it in oil, creating a wonderfully sizzling sound. The simple cooking method preserved the meat's deliciousness, making it a memorable treat. They enjoyed a hearty meal and spent a memorable night. Upon returning home, they arrived just in time for Thanksgiving and prepared a feast, with the deer meat as the main dish. The meal was enjoyed amid laughter and family joy. Steven later traveled to the rugged and remote Missouri Breaks in north-central Montana, home to various wildlife, including deer. This hunting trip included 2 apprentices, whose primary job was acting. To provide better service, Steven invited an experienced hunter. After exchanging pleasantries, they organized their equipment and set out in 2 small boats. The desolate landscape evoked a sense of loneliness and weariness, but the sight of an eagle brought them back to reality. In the 19th century, the area was a hideout for horse thieves. The group quickly reached their destination, went ashore, and began setting up camp using simple tents. The camp was set up quickly, and then they split into pairs to start the primary task of hunting, reconnaissance. Knowing the importance of understanding both themselves and their prey, they climbed to a higher position to observe from above, but Steven found nothing. Meanwhile, the other pair encountered a doe moving quickly at the bottom of a riverbed. Despite their disappointment that it was a doe, they remained hopeful as they spotted several more deer nearby. They carefully observed, trying to identify an adult buck, which they eventually found. However, they hesitated to shoot, as the distance was too great and the buck kept moving, providing no sure shot. Out of humanitarian consideration, they decided to abandon the hunt as dusk approached and returned to camp. Joy and Steven saw no deer all afternoon, making for a poor start. At dawn the next day, Steven's luck changed as he quickly spotted 3 deer, including 2 adult bucks. However, the unfavorable wind direction made it risky to approach, so they moved slowly, waiting for the wind to change. But tracking deer in the vast wilderness proved challenging, and they inevitably lost sight of their target. On the other side, Brian's group, after some searching, found a doe with 2 fawns. Knowing that males often follow females, they crept closer for a better look. Their assumption was correct. A buck was hiding in the bushes ahead. As Brian was about to act, the deer swiftly moved and decided to cross the river, eluding them completely. The cold weather did not deter the deer from entering the water, indicating they sensed danger, likely from human scent. This outcome was disheartening. Meanwhile, Steven and Joy continued searching for deer. Steven noticed fresh deer tracks in the muddy ground, encouraging them both to intensify their search. They soon spotted 2 deer, with a ridge conveniently blocking their view, which was perfect for getting closer. Climbing to the top of the ridge, they peered down to find the buck below. Steven used his backpack as a rest. Sensing danger, the buck started to trot and call out, adopting a hopping and jumping gait to evade the hunter's aim. Clearly, this was an experienced deer. Their first encounter ended with Steven's complete failure, but he was not ready to give up. Following the ridge for over 100 yards, they encountered the buck again. Steven mimicked deer calls, and with his accurate imitation, the curious buck turned to look. In that instant, Joy decisively fired, and the buck fell at the sound of the gunshot. Steven generously praised him. At that moment, Joy realized he had actually succeeded in hunting, a feeling both tense and thrilling. They approached to inspect the deer, a handsome mule deer with a robust and sturdy body that fascinated the hunters. This feeling can only be truly understood by those who experience it firsthand. Joy sincerely thanked Steven for enriching his life. Steven handed him a knife, as dissecting the prey personally is a hunter's highest honor. Joy hoped the deer's spirit would return to nature, making this hunt unforgettable for him. Back at camp, the other two heard the news and sincerely congratulated him, while Brian felt envious. Although it was late, they had not yet had dinner. Steven sliced some fresh liver, heated oil in a pan, and prepared some onions. He fried the onions first, then added the liver. After a brief wait, he sprinkled some salt, and a simple yet delicious dish was ready. As a reward, Joy got the first taste. The tender liver, combined with the aroma of onions, was incredibly satisfying. They all thoroughly enjoyed it, and spent a joyful evening amidst laughter. The next morning, after freshening up, they set off on their journey again. Joy had already completed his task, but Brian had not, so he felt considerable pressure. He moved alongside the experienced hunter, searching for a target. Their persistence paid off when they spotted a potential target on the backside of a ridge. They slowly approached and observed from a higher vantage point, but initially found nothing. However, the experienced hunter's intuition told him that a deer was hiding nearby. They climbed using their hands and feet and, sure enough, spotted a doe. Brian adjusted his position, and sensing danger, the doe started to hop away before Brian could shoot. The experienced hunter mimicked a deer call, which confused the doe. It stopped and turned its head towards them, providing an excellent opportunity. Brian pulled the trigger, and the shot pierced the doe's lungs, causing it to tumble several times. The loud noise frightened other mule deer, causing them to flee. The two men approached to inspect their prey, a mature doe. Brian touched the deer's head, reflecting on the moment, and wishing its spirit a peaceful return to nature. He then began to skin the deer, guided by the experienced hunter. Brian successfully removed the innards and packed the edible parts. They dragged the deer back, marking a fantastic experience for Brian. Steven and Joy, seeing them return, were happy for them and prepared to meet up. The scene was quite heartwarming. With both apprentices having completed their hunting tasks, they were ready to celebrate with a venison feast. First, they needed to retrieve the deer Joy had hunted, which was still hanging from a tree and hadn't been taken by wild animals. They decided to butcher the deer on the spot and started a fire. Brian cut a piece of the meat and tried eating it raw, a primitive method, though the others preferred cooked food. While waiting for appetizers, Joy hung the deer parts. When the roasted meat was ready, they began tasting it, and it was delicious. They continued butchering and roasting simultaneously, not impacting their work while satisfying their hunger. With perfect teamwork, they quickly processed the deer. It is said that deer eyes taste like jelly. Steven scooped one out and Brian tried it, describing a strange sensation. Afterwards, they packed all the venison and set off back to camp. Meanwhile, the experienced hunter brought the doe back to camp and began to skin it. His skilled use of the knife quickly removed the skin. Today's main dish was a special one, cooking a deer head, a recipe passed down among the mountain people of the northern Rocky Mountains, which Steven had learned from a book. When the three arrived at camp, the hunter had already prepared everything. Steven took over, digging a hole in the charcoal, then wetting a cloth, wrapping the deer head in aluminum foil, and then in the cloth. The neck was treated the same way. They then waited patiently. They also prepared some sweet potatoes, a heart, and several pumpkins, wrapping the vegetables in foil and treating the heart by mixing it with chopped garlic and apples, then wrapping it in foil and placing everything on the charcoal. They added more wood to cook everything quickly. Their culinary efforts didn't end there. The final dish was roasted loin. First, they cut it into pieces, flattened them with stones, and as the items under the charcoal were almost ready, they gathered the coals and set up a grill. After seasoning the loin, they grilled it. It didn't take long for the meat to cook. Steven then opened the foil to check the venison. A delicious aroma instantly spread, stimulating their appetites. Steven cut a tender piece for everyone to taste. The piping hot meat melted in their mouths, delicious and flavorful, with the roasted loin being particularly memorable for its lean yet chewy texture. They feasted heartily, never imagining venison could be so delicious. Steven's expertise as a gourmet was evident, and they were fortunate to enjoy such a feast. Each dish had its unique flavor, and they were unsure which to eat first. They indulged themselves thoroughly, incredibly satisfied with their hunting trip. This time, he came to Sonora in Mexico, teaming up with his friend Ramy to hunt for two local nuisances, the collared peckery, known as a skunk pig due to its resemblance to a wild pig but from a different family, and coyotes. The peccary, despite its unpleasant odor from a gland on its back, has tasty meat that's a local delicacy. Coyotes, on the other hand, are rarely eaten, and in some places, eating them is considered taboo. Ramey, an experienced hunter, and he drove to the location. Upon arrival, they used binoculars and quickly spotted several peccaries. After marking their location, they set off and soon reached a rocky area known to be inhabited by peccaries. They hid and observed, and Ramey prepared to demonstrate his calling skills. He mimicked a predator's call, which scared the peccaries into running fast like uncontrolled tanks. Steven, ready with his bow, aimed as one came into range. Unfortunately, its sudden speed change caused him to miss. Despite this, another straggler provided a second chance, but Steven's archery was not up to par, and he missed again. They went to retrieve their arrows. The first was clean, but the second had blood on it, indicating a hit. At 50 yards, they found the dead peccary, thrilled with their successful hunt. The next morning, they embarked on a coyote hunt. Steven, once a fur hunter familiar with coyotes' habits, and Ramey enjoyed the sunrise while waiting for coyotes. They used a recorder playing coyote calls, hoping to lure them in by mimicking a dying rabbit's screams, considered an unforgivable act by the local coyotes. However, after calling for half an hour with only crows showing interest, they realized the coyotes had seen through their ploy. Deciding to take action, they stood up, but then noticed coyotes were already nearby, observing them quietly. They lay down again, trying to lure the coyotes, but it was too late. The coyotes ran off, proving smarter than expected. They moved to a new spot and after a while, spotted 2 coyotes. Steven aimed and fired, and the coyotes fell. They approached their catch, which seemed well fed. After carrying the coyotes to their truck, they prepared to cook. Steven skinned the coyote, removed the innards, and cut off the head and tail. They bound it between 2 poles and placed it over a fire. After it charred, they soaked it in water to expand the hair follicles, facilitating hair removal. Once cleaned, they cracked the bones to spread it flat, grilled it on a rack, and seasoned it with cumin and salt, which brought out a delicious aroma. They flipped the coyote to grill the other side. Once thoroughly cooked, Steven cut a piece of meat, and they both tasted it, finding it unexpectedly delightful and very satisfying. After enjoying their meal, they drove up the mountain because Ramey had yet to hunt a peccary and couldn't return empty-handed. The two returned to the location where they had hunted the previous day. The Peckery family was still active there. Ramey strung his bow and began selecting a target. He chose a plump peccary and shot an arrow that hit its mark. Although the peccary ran away, it left a trail of blood. They found the peccary at the bottom of a canyon and brought it back to the ranch to skin and slice the meat. Chata, the ranch's cook, is skilled in preparing various dishes. They began the preparations. Someone cut the meat while another used a grinder. Chata mixed the minced meat with chili powder, preparing to make sausages. To enhance the flavor, he added garlic, canola oil, lard, salt, and other ingredients. Chili powder was essential. After mixing everything well, they cooked it in a frying pan. Meanwhile, Chata baked some corn tortillas and squeezed a bucket of fruit juice. Dinner was ready. They placed the minced meat on the tortillas, rolled them up, and ate. The flavor was unique and they couldn't help but praise Chata. They were very satisfied with the hunt. Steven returned to his hometown in Michigan, USA, during the prime fishing season of summer. He wanted to relive childhood memories, so he took a canoe. The river led to Lake Michigan, passing through vibrant green marshes. He chose a spot to land and set up camp. He adjusted his fishing bow, then cut down a small tree for use later. Bow fishing requires visual lock, which means using the sun's reflection to target the fish. The pole he had cut was now useful. He paddled while keeping a close watch on the river's surface. Unfortunately, he found no fish, possibly because the weather was too hot and the fish were resting. Evening is the most active time for fish, so he decided to return to set up his tent. After setting up, he took out 2 lights to mount on the sides of the canoe. He cut 2 logs, tied them across the boat, and fixed the lights to the wood. Steven was very pleased with the setup. With an hour until dark, he waited patiently. As night fell, a bright light suddenly illuminated the quiet wilderness. A man stood on the boat with a weapon, his gaze sharp. He was focused on the river, but unexpectedly saw a duck. Normally, Steven wouldn't mind improving his meal, but today he was focused on a more important task. His concentration paid off when he saw a fish. Unfortunately, his first attempt was unsuccessful, as he was not accustomed to the weapon. He quickly reevaluated his approach, and on his next attempt, he successfully hit a fish. The fish struggled as he lifted it, which excited Steven even more. The light attracted larger fish. With careful aim, Steven could achieve perfect accuracy at close range. After struggling, a large fish was almost exhausted. Just as Steven was about to pull it out, the fish made a swift turn and escaped. Annoyed, Steven realized he had forgotten to tighten the arrowhead after catching the previous fish. Learning from this, he continued fishing and proved himself again by shooting a large fish in the head. He chuckled, finding this method of fishing very enjoyable. The next fish was a local species called the butterfly fin, notable for a spot on its tail and an unusually ugly head, resembling a bullfrog's. Having caught enough fish, Steven returned to camp, began scaling the fish, and cut them into slices. He sprinkled salt to prevent spoilage during the warm night and stored the slices in a box. The night passed quietly. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, and wisps of smoke drifted through the air. Steven was preparing breakfast. He took out the fish slices, smelled them to ensure they had not spoiled, and rinsed them with river water. He then soaked them in a basin of fresh water to dilute the salt, as otherwise, the fish would be too salty. Afterward, he collected some branches to build a grill. Steven placed the fish slices on the grill, waited a moment, then flipped them. Feeling the timing was right, he tore off a piece to taste. The fish was very tender, resembling smoked fish. Delicious food should be savored slowly, and Steven ate leisurely. Usually accustomed to eating heavy meats, he found the grilled fish refreshingly lighter and very satisfying. He saved the remaining fish for snacks. As he floated downstream, he decided to try his luck using a fishing rod and line. He arrived at his spot and began fishing with a small fish model as bait, which swam enticingly in the water. The boat continued to drift until a fish took the bait. Steven immediately jumped into the water and pulled in the large, vigorous fish. It struggled fiercely until the last moment, bringing good luck. Steven felt like he had mastered a crucial skill and quickly caught a second fish. However, after comparing its size, he realized it was not yet mature, so he released it. Steven continued paddling, enjoying the birdsong and flowers, which cleansed his heavy spirit. As he moved forward, more modern buildings appeared. He was entering the civilized world. He chose to land on an island opposite a resort. At nightfall, Steven began fishing again. He spotted a sharp-edged fish and shot it with an arrow, securing his first fish of the evening. He continued and caught a larger fish with a mouthful of sharp spikes and scales as hard as armor, but its meat was delicious. The next day, he made breakfast using pliers to peel the skin of the unusual fish, avoiding the thick armor and extracting the tender meat inside. He sliced it, coated it in breadcrumbs, and fried it in oil. The delicious fish fillets were crispy on the outside and tender inside, with a fragrance that was irresistible. Afterward, he paddled his canoe, admiring the beautiful Lake Michigan. On this trip, he had come to the northeastern part of New Mexico with his friend Cody to chase antelope. Upon arrival, Steven spotted an antelope about 2 miles away. The antelope is the second fastest land animal on Earth, second only to the cheetah, and has incredible vision, able to spot predators from afar. Hence, hunting antelope is not an easy task, and opportunities are often fleeting. Before approaching, they loaded their rifles as it was mating season, and males were busy seeking females. Love can cloud judgment. Even upon seeing humans, a male might approach in an attempt to court. They saw an aroused male, but it sensed something amiss and hesitated to move. After a moment, it chose to flee, and they missed their chance. Just as they were about to give up, the antelope unexpectedly stopped on a hillside, perhaps still hopeful about the humans. After a discussion, they decided to continue searching for a new target, as the antelope had become wary. Eventually, they found another male antelope. Cody aimed, and as the antelope paused, he took the shot. The antelope fell, and they waited a while before checking the animal. Cody, a traditional hunter, always prayed after a hunt, thanking the animal for its sacrifice and hoping its spirit would return to nature. It's 3 p.m., and the weather is unbearably hot. To prevent the innards from rotting, they decide to butcher the antelope on the spot to cool the meat quickly. They then categorize and pack the meat, each carrying a backpack as they begin their return journey. Cody's father, Harold, is skilled at making a delicacy known as red chili antelope cornbread, which Steven is eagerly anticipating. When the two arrive at the farm, Harold has been waiting for a while. After exchanging greetings, they begin preparations. Harold cuts the loin into even chunks, heats oil in a pan, and fries the meat until brown. He then adds some flour and chili powder, made from a local type of chili that is both spicy and aromatic. After stirring everything evenly, he adds a pot of water and simmers it on low heat for half an hour. During this time, he prepares some cornbread. By sunset, dinner is ready. The meat is placed on cornbread, topped with fries, onions, lettuce, and red chili, and finished with some broth. The delicious dish is served, and Steven can't wait to taste it. The aroma of the cornbread, combined with the tenderness of the antelope meat and the accent of chili, elevates the whole flavor. They spend a pleasant evening together. The next morning, Steven and Cody set out again, this time with Steven hunting. As the sun rises, visibility increases, and antelope are visible everywhere. Their task is to find a suitable target. Soon, a lucky male antelope appears in their view. Its robust body and mature aura make it an ideal target. Steven carefully approaches the antelope, which remains unaware of the danger. He hides behind a rock, observing the target stealthily. After ensuring it's safe, he crawls through a wire fence to get closer. Just as he sees an opportunity, Steven stops because he notices a row of houses in the distance. Firing recklessly could endanger humans, so he reluctantly returns. They continue searching for a new antelope. By noon, they spot another male antelope. However, a herd of cattle appears on the high ground nearby, affecting their shot, but also providing cover to approach the antelope. Using this cover, they successfully get within shooting range. The cattle move away just as Steven prepares to act alone. To avoid startling the wildlife, he crawls forward. The antelope seems to be asleep, oblivious to the danger. Steven adjusts his rifle, takes a deep breath, and pulls the trigger. The antelope falls to the ground, and silence returns to the wilderness, with only the fallen antelope as evidence of the recent kill. Steven touches the beautiful animal, appreciating its beauty before beginning to process it. Cody goes to bring the pickup truck. They bag the antelope and load it into the truck to head off. For dinner, they plan to make antelope with roasted chili and cheese. Steven slices the tender meat and flattens it with the back of an axe. He then gathers a large pile of seasonings, adds them to the meat, and fries it until brown. He first adds chili, then cheese, and covers the pan to simmer for a few minutes. The dish, treated like a steak, is ready to be savored. Steven takes a bite, finding the flavor exceptionally satisfying. It's a very enjoyable hunting trip. Today, Steven is ready to showcase his cooking skills again. First, he sharpens his chef's knife, crucial for dissecting animal joints and bones. Currently, Steven is holding a deer's thigh. Thanks to the precise cutting angle, it remains a complete structure, which helps keep the meat fresh. Today's first dish is roasted deer leg. As the lower leg contains tendons and connective tissue, it requires long cooking to soften. Steven starts by scoring the meat to break down its structure. He then uses a steel saw to shorten the bones, which he ties with a string for later use. Steven fires up the stove and scoops some bear fat into the pan to melt. During this, he seasons the leg with salt and pepper, coats it with flour, and fries it in the hot fat. This dish is inspired by a fusion of different cultures. Similar cooking methods exist in Spain, and a friend from Italy also makes a similar dish. After browning the meat, he removes it from the pan, then dices onions and garlic to fry in the same oil, preparing other side dishes like celery and carrots that are key for adding flavor. He adds sage and thyme. Once the vegetables are cooked, he places the leg meat on top, pours in some tomato sauce and water, and transfers it to the oven. Now, Steven handles the deer thigh. He uses fennel powder, which is great for removing any gamey taste from the deer meat. He mixes a quarter cup of salt with several tablespoons of brown sugar, fennel powder, and chopped thyme. The seeds he uses include black pepper, coriander, and juniper. He heats them in a cast iron pot, then crushes them into a powder, which he pours into a tray. He takes the roasted leg out of the oven to check it carefully for any hairs or impurities. Steven then uses olive oil to create a sticky surface on the meat and applies the spice mix by patting it in thoroughly. Next, he prepares a roasting bed by laying onions, garlic, and fennel leaves in the pan, drizzles some olive oil, then places the meat on top and returns it to the oven. The next dish is sheep's eggs, cooked gently in butter to preserve their natural flavor. Unfortunately, he doesn't gauge the heat correctly, and the eggs burst. Thankfully, the issue isn't severe. Steven slices the eggs thinly and tastes one. The sheep's eggs are chewy and have a rich flavor. He then begins preparing another dish he once enjoyed at an expensive restaurant in San Francisco during dinner with an elderly lady. It was made from bone marrow, which left a deep impression on him. Today, he attempts to recreate it. He takes 2 deer thighs, cuts them into small pieces with a steel saw, and arranges them upright, uncooked, in the oven, looking forward to the transformation. With all the dishes in the oven, Steven has enough time to make a side dish. He grinds cornmeal, mixes it with water, and cooks a pot of corn porridge. Once cooled, he shapes the thick porridge into an oval using a plastic bag, then cuts it into thick slices and fries them. When the time is almost up, he removes the deer thigh to test its doneness. Satisfied, he removes the meat, pours a bottle of red wine over the vegetables below, and continues to heat it. Once boiling, he strains the juice to drizzle over the meat, enhancing its flavor. The bone marrow is also ready, each piece translucent and perfectly timed. He inserts herbs to enhance the dish's aesthetics. Steven then checks the next dish. The tomato deer bone soup is also ready. After a busy half day, all the dishes are served. They are not only visually appealing and flavorful, but also each has its unique characteristic. Steven slices the thigh meat thinly. Meanwhile, his friends and family arrive. He serves each dish, enjoying sharing his culinary creations and watching the pleasure on his guests' faces. They do not disappoint him, eagerly devouring the meal, which they declare the most delicious food they have ever tasted. Everyone generously praises Steven, affirming his status as an excellent gourmet. The man named Steven is a full-time hunter and gourmet. This time he came to New Zealand to hunt pigs with a professional pig hunter using only 2 hunting dogs and a knife. South Island, where they are, boasts a diverse ecosystem with glaciers, rolling grassy hills, and dense coastal forests. Darren, the professional hunter and dog trainer, introduced his hunting dogs to Steven. The two set off by car, discussing the local history along the way. Wild pigs, introduced from Europe in the 18th century and lacking natural predators, reproduce rapidly and have become a nuisance. To maintain ecological balance, skilled hunters have stepped up. Upon arrival, Darren released the dogs with GPS collars, and they dashed out to track the pigs. The men followed slowly, noticing signs of pig activity scattered on the ground. They soon spotted a deer, but it wasn't their target. Checking the GPS, Darren confirmed the dog's location, and they moved on. After a while, they found a pig's hoof print. Darren estimated it belonged to a sow or boar weighing about 70 pounds. Suddenly, the dogs returned, circled, and dived back into the woods. Darren signaled to listen carefully. Soon, barking and a pig's distress calls indicated a struggle. Darren boldly grabbed a pig leg, destabilizing it, while the dogs fiercely bit its snout. Steven then stabbed the boar's heart with his knife. Their teamwork ended the pig's struggle, a thrilling first experience for Steven. After the excitement, they dragged the sow to an open area for processing, confirming it weighed about 70 pounds, as Darren had predicted. They removed the innards, cut each hoof, and tied the pig in a backpack-like position. The hunters then headed back to the main road. However, Darren grew concerned when he noticed no signal from the dogs on the GPS. They retraced their steps, finding intermittent signals. Growing more anxious about a possible accident, Darren and Steven hurried back and finally heard the dogs again. They found one dog near a burrow, likely the pig's den. Using a flashlight, Darren confirmed a pig was inside. The tunnel had 2 entrances, with the dogs blocking one while the pig was deep inside. Attempting to dig through the soft soil proved challenging, so they sought another approach. Despite the dogs' excitement, a frontal assault was too difficult. The men used sticks to continue digging and finally broke open a crack at the top, visibly trapping the pig. They tied a rope around the pig's neck and started a tug of war. With combined effort, they freed the pig, but before it could react, a sharp knife ended its life. After the hectic activity, both men were exhausted but satisfied. Darren generously rewarded the dogs for their role. Rested, they began their return journey. When they passed a small creek, they stopped to clean the wild pig. Muddy liquid kept spreading no matter how much they washed it. It still seemed dirty. One person cleaned while the other gathered firewood and started a fire. Once the fire was strong, they placed the pig over it to singe off the hair. After the hair was charred, they used a small knife to scrape it clean. They dipped the pig in water and repeated the process over the fire until all the hair was removed. Next, they butchered the pig. Darren, with his vast experience, skillfully cut the meat from different parts. Admiring the meat cuts, Steven couldn't help praising them. They packed all the meat into the car and headed to the farm. Back home, Darren secured the dogs and rewarded them with a piece of meat. Then, they prepared dinner. Darren cut half of the meat with the skin, seasoned it with salt, and drizzled it with olive oil before placing it in the oven. They also prepared several vegetable dishes to balance the meal, making it less greasy. The aroma of pork filled the kitchen, whetting their appetite as they enjoyed the meal with laughter and conversation. Days later, Steven arrived in New Zealand's southern Alps in search of a mysterious creature known as the long-haired mountain dwellers. Accompanying him was his friend Remy, an outdoor enthusiast curious about wildlife and mysterious places. On their way, they spotted some large geese and stopped to hunt one for dinner. After a gunshot, the surviving geese quickly flew away. Steven quickly collected the fallen goose, promising a delightful meal that evening. They continued their journey, with Steven excitedly discussing his anticipation. The Southern Alps, a massive and steep mountain range cut by glaciers, lakes, and tributaries, peaks at 12,000 feet. Due to the rocky terrain ahead, they decided to proceed on foot. After checking their gear, they set out, feeling a solemn respect for the ice mountains around them. After a while, they used binoculars and spotted 4 mountain goats on the mid-slope, feeling relieved. They decided to set up a camp to lighten their load. While searching for a suitable spot, they stumbled upon a hunter's cabin in the valley, a lifesaver in the wilderness. Remy opened the door to find a simple but clean cabin with a bunk bed and a mattress, and a journal on the wall detailing what the last person did there. After settling in, they explored the nearby area before dark. Following the sound of water, they found a river flowing from the glacier, which swelled in the evenings with floating ice chunks. They set up a stand on the bank to observe the ice mountains, but unfortunately, they didn't spot the earlier seen goats as the sun set. Just as they were about to give up, Remy spotted what looked like several chamois, a species native to European mountains, and now quite rare. Excited by this rare sighting, they planned to switch their hunting target to chamois, a too good opportunity to miss. However, it was already dark, so hunting had to wait until the next day. Back in the cabin, they cut the goose into pieces and heated oil in a pan. Once hot, they added the goose meat, which sizzled as they chatted and waited for their meal. The patient wait paid off. Sprinkled with some chili powder, they began to savor the crispy on the outside, tender on the inside goose meat. Truly, the taste was delicious, a testament to the freshness of the ingredients. The next day was sunny and clear. The 2 men sat on rocks, observing the opposite glacier. Unfortunately, the chamois from the previous day had disappeared. They changed their position and continued observing. Luckily, this time Steven spotted 2 chamois. Concerned they might wander off, they quickly moved into action. To reach them, they needed to cross a river. They chose a relatively narrow section. Steven measured the water depth, feeling uneasy about it. After discussing, they decided to take the risk. Steven wore waterproof gear and tied a rope around his waist. Remy assisted from the shore. Although prepared, Steven felt unstable when the river hit him. He struggled to control his balance and proceeded step by step. Mid-river, the current intensified. Feeling unstable, Steven turned back to try another spot. As they were packing up, a chamois appeared across the river. Seizing the opportunity, they hid and watched. The chamois, unaware of the danger, moved into an open area. Steven used his backpack as a stand, aimed, and fired decisively. The chamois stumbled and fell. Steven climbed to a higher point to confirm it was dead. The challenge now was crossing the river. They moved downstream to a calmer spot. Remy held the line while Steven attempted to cross, but it was still unsuccessful. They returned to the original spot and tried again. This time, their coordination helped Steven gradually approach the opposite shore. Just as things were going smoothly, Steven slipped and plunged into the water. Struggling, he stood up and courageously continued. Remy, watching from the shore, was anxious. With effort, Steven safely reached the other side. He secured the rope to a rock and checked the chamois. Chamois are rare, and many hunters never encounter them, so Steven was thrilled. After admiring it, he prepared the chamois for the journey back. Thinking of the river's cold water gave him a headache. Remy suggested bringing the chamois over first. Steven tied a lasso around its neck, while Remy set up a simple pulley system. Using the water flow, they let the chamois slide towards the shore. When it neared, Remy rushed over, grabbed the horns, and pulled it ashore, giving today's first compliment. Then it was Steven's turn. He securely tied the rope around his waist and, with Remy's assistance, slowly moved and successfully reached the other side. Due to the delay, they worried about the organs spoiling, so they decided to process the chamois right by the river. Since Steven had shot, Remy did the butchering, giving both a sense of involvement. Remy skillfully skinned and cut the meat. Just as they were about to leave, Steven noticed a suspicious black dot. It was a Himalayan tahr on the mountainside, exactly their original target. Despite already hunting a chamois by chance, they couldn't miss this opportunity. However, with night approaching, climbing the mountain was unwise. They decided to return to the cabin and plan for the morning. Next was their most anticipated part, a local cooking method. They used a rock as a griddle, spreading oil on it and placing it over the fire. While waiting for it to heat, Remy cut a few tender pieces of meat. Once hot, Steven flipped the stone, sprinkled some salt, and placed the meat on it. When the aroma spread, he flipped the meat to grill the other side. After a short wait, the meat was ready. They eagerly tasted it. The meat was tender and delicious, somewhat reminiscent of lamb. The next day, the two men set out early to look for the goat. They were in luck and soon spotted a Himalayan tahr standing on the opposite ridge, about 1,000 feet above ground. Climbing such a steep peak is challenging, but their hunting passion drove them forward. From the bottom, the mountain didn't seem very high, but its grandeur became apparent as they faced it directly. They climbed for a while, getting so tired they had to stop and rest before continuing. The higher they went, the steeper and more treacherous the path became, posing a risk of sliding down. Despite the difficulties, they finally got close to the mountaintop, and the goat was about 460 yards away. To avoid being seen, they decided to circle around while being extra careful not to slip. Soon, they reached their planned spot. Unfortunately, the goat, possibly awakened from rest or sensing danger, or simply due to feeding time, moved. As they approached slowly, they saw it grazing below. Steven set up his backpack for a better shooting position, while Remy used binoculars to monitor. Their main concern was the goat falling off the cliff after being shot. Fortunately, the goat moved towards them, away from the cliff edge. Steven waited for the right moment, and then took the shot. The goat ran wildly at the impact, and soon disappeared from view. Excited yet anxious, they hoped it hadn't gone far. Their luck held, and they found the goat dead in an open snowy area. Its fur felt incredibly soft. They processed the goat right there on the mountaintop. The Himalayan tahr, native to the Himalayas, is mysterious and rare. Eager to taste its meat, they set up a cooking station right on the snowy mountain. They heated oil in a pan and added the sliced meat, pouring in a bottle of secret hot sauce. While waiting, they continued butchering the goat. Remy, with his unique culinary insights, sliced some thin pieces of meat and topped them with garlic slices. Steven tasted a piece, enjoying its fresh, primal flavor. Meanwhile, the dish in the pan was ready, looking and smelling delicious. They dipped the meat in the thick sauce and savored the rich, aromatic flavors, stimulating their taste buds as they relished the meal. Steven is a hunter and a gourmet. Although many say he wastes food and can't cook, today he wanted to prove himself. This episode focused solely on cooking, offering a visual feast and leaving viewers envious. Let's begin. The first ingredient is turkey, a Thanksgiving staple. Those who have tried turkey know it can be dry and tough, which is often due to improper cooking. The first step in preparation is to skin the turkey. When the turkey was caught in the wild, it was only plucked, and the skin was left to keep the meat fresh. Now, the skin is no longer needed and would affect the taste if left on. However, Steven wouldn't discard the skin. He had another use for it. The second step is deboning the turkey, slicing the meat from different parts, and breaking the bones for soup stock. He then prepared some side dishes, sliced them, and placed them in a pot with olive oil before putting it into the oven. The turkey meat was used to make sausage, along with venison and black bear fat, as both turkey and deer meats are lean and dry, so adding fat helps balance them. The meat was ground into fine mince. He then gathered spices, 6 pine nuts, a few scoops of black pepper, thyme, allspice, chili, cinnamon, and nutmeg, along with chopped mushrooms and pistachios. Salt and garlic were essentials, and he added a bit of brandy and wine. Next, he used the turkey skin for the sausage casing, but since it tears easily, he wrapped it in coarse cotton cloth. He spread the meat mixture on the turkey skin, added diced turkey breast on top, covered it with more mixture, then tightly wrapped the turkey skin around it, secured it with the cloth, and tied it with string to keep the sausage intact. After a while, he took the turkey bones out of the oven, broke them, and put them back into a pot with thyme, bay leaves, and a little salt, adding a gallon of water to simmer for hours. Now, Steven prepared the second dish, brined black bear ham. The meat, from an Alaskan black bear's shoulder, was different from most game, marbled with fat. Before smoking the ham, Steven prepared the brine with a gallon of water, 2 cups of brown sugar, and half a cup of salt, stirring them into a murky liquid. He submerged the bear meat, covered it with a plate to ensure proper marinating. After 2 hours, the turkey bone broth was almost done. He poured the broth out and tasted the meat from the bones, which tasted good. He then put the sausage in the broth to infuse it with flavor. Next, he prepared a minced meat pie with venison. The pie crust was homemade, as he was not a professional baker. He mixed 1½ cups of flour, 8 spoons of bear lard, a pinch of salt, and a little milk into dough, wrapped it in plastic, and chilled it for 20 minutes. The venison, just cooked and very tender, was from the deer's ribs. He also prepared some wild boar fat, a variety of spices, and fruit pieces, mixing them into a fruit meat filling with some apple cider and brandy. Steven checked on the black bear ham, finding it well marinated. He patted it dry with paper and put it into a smoker at 200 degrees Celsius. Back inside, he began rolling out the pie crust, shaping it into a pie form, though he had to patch up some cracks with his hands. He filled it with the meat mixture, realizing he needed another pie crust to cover it, but it turned out even more misshapen. After applying a layer of olive oil and a sprinkle of salt, he baked it for 45 minutes. Friends and family arrived, and Steven served his creations. He sliced the turkey sausage, poured some soy sauce on a plate, and added the sausage. Everyone praised it highly. He then cut the black bear ham, which looked so enticing that just adding tea powder made its taste exceptional. The last dish was sampled first by the children. One child dug in with his finger and enjoyed the pie. This fun moment highlighted a successful dinner party, with everyone savoring the food and admiring Steven's cooking skills. Steven arrived in the Brooks Range in northern Alaska to search for reindeer with a friend named Thiem. The area is filled with winding rivers and vast lakes, home to a variety of wildlife. They quickly spotted a herd of deer with a male that could weigh up to 300 pounds. Unfortunately, local laws prohibit hunting on the day of arrival, so they had to wait until the next day. To secure food, they decided to go fishing. They found a calm spot by the river and began fishing. Steven, an adept fisherman, soon caught a fish. Despite its vigorous struggle, he managed to pull it ashore. It was a grayling, known for its tender meat and favored by locals. Steven taught Thiem how to fish, and after several attempts, Thiem also caught a grayling. They then rested for the night. The next day at dawn, they resumed their hunt. Their luck continued as they quickly found a migrating deer herd. They planned to wait in an open grassy area where the reindeer would likely stop to graze, providing an opportunity for the hunters. Hidden in the bushes, they soon saw a large set of antlers belonging to a mature male reindeer. Thiem took aim, but as the reindeer was moving, he had to wait patiently for a shot. When the reindeer paused, Thiem quickly fired, hitting it fatally. It stumbled and fell. After ensuring it was dead, they approached and admired the large antlers before processing the reindeer on the spot by removing its organs and cutting it into parts to take back. That evening, they fried the 2 fish and prepared a vegetable medley to accompany the meal. They enjoyed the fish thoroughly and then slept. The next day, they resumed their search for reindeer but found that the herd had moved on. After discussing, they decided to head to the intersection of 2 lakes, where they spotted a few stray reindeer. However, before they could act, a call came from their camp signaling a nearby grizzly bear, likely attracted by the scent of the reindeer blood. The bear appeared interested but was deterred by loud noises from the camp and eventually left after hesitating. With the bear gone, Steven and Thiem resumed hunting. They crept closer to a robust male reindeer and prepared for a shot. Steven waited patiently and fired when the reindeer stopped, knocking it down after a few steps. They quickly butchered the animal and brought it back to camp. Unfortunately, the grizzly returned, still intent on stealing their catch. The men each grabbed a rifle and confronted the bear. Steven yelled to scare it and fired a shot into the air, then aimed at the bear. Startled, the bear sprinted away, but not without turning back to glare at them angrily, before finally leaving in a huff. The next part was what the two men were most looking forward to. They fried the deer meat in a pot, then took out some carrots, sweet potatoes, and chili peppers, chopping them up and adding them to the pot with the broth. They also added some thyme for flavor. After cooking for a while, the moment they lifted the lid, a delicious aroma spread, making their mouths water. They couldn't wait to taste it, and the flavor was incredibly satisfying, making them exclaim with pleasure. Days later, he arrived in the Talk River area of the Alaska Range to search for the elusive Dall sheep with his friend Paul. This area is known for its rolling high mountains and is largely inaccessible due to its rugged terrain, attracting many hunters. Each year, 2,500 people compete for a hunting permit, and some unlucky hunters have been applying for 40 years without success. However, Steven was lucky to be selected on his 5th attempt. Local regulations require non-residents to be accompanied by a registered guide or a local relative when hunting. Fortunately, Steven's brother Danny, an ecologist and avid hunter, met this requirement, so 3 of them went on this hunting trip. After arriving, they studied the map and set up camp before scouting the area. They hadn't seen any sheep yet, but spotted a black bear and, surprisingly, a grizzly bear nearby, truly indicating this was a wild region. Although the hunting season started in 2 days, their real work began the next morning. The next morning, they decided to split up to increase their chances of spotting the sheep. Before departing, they hung their belongings high up in trees to keep them away from bears. Steven and Danny set off together, while Paul went alone. A marmot curiously watched these unwelcome guests and vocally expressed its displeasure. The steep mountain paths severely drained their energy, and it took a lot of effort to reach the top of the ridge, which coincidentally matched the time they had agreed to meet with Paul. Using binoculars, they spotted Paul on the opposite peak, having also reached his destination. Through hand signals, Paul informed them that there were sheep directly above them. With 15 hours left until the hunting season opened, they settled halfway up the mountain for the night. The next day, when the hunting season officially started, Steven and Danny began their ascent. Unfortunately, the mountaintop was covered in fog, severely limiting visibility. To avoid alarming the sheep, they hid behind a recessed rock, waiting for the weather to clear. Hours later, the fog finally lifted, and they resumed their ascent. Upon reaching the top, they spotted 2 sheep, fortunately unnoticed by them. According to the law, they could only hunt rams with fully curled horns, a sign of rams older than 8 years. Steven carefully assessed one of the rams and felt that it met the criteria, but he couldn't be 100% sure until they were within shooting range. Their position was tricky. Any careless movement would alert the sheep. So, one watched while the other slowly crawled, successfully leaving the open area and avoiding the sheep's line of sight. They quickened their pace while the sheep continued playing, seemingly oblivious to their presence. As Steven neared his spot, the sheep began to move. To get a better view, he decided to climb to the top of the ridge. Using his binoculars, he confirmed the sheep were still moving, but now within a suitable distance. He saw that the right horn of one sheep was fully curled, meeting the hunting criteria. Steven readied his rifle, waiting for the sheep to turn. The opportunity came quickly. The sheep stood broadside on a rock. Steven pulled the trigger, and the sheep fell, starting to roll down. Steven's heart tightened, fearing it might roll to an unreachable spot at the bottom of a cliff. He watched intently as the sheep rolled for a while before finally stopping, allowing him to breathe a sigh of relief. He approached the target, and only then did he fully appreciate the majesty of the sheep. It had a pair of thick, powerful horns. Touching these formidable weapons, Steven was deeply moved, considering it a king among bighorn sheep. He was very fond of this animal and expressed his admiration repeatedly. Paul arrived a bit later from the other side. Together, the 3 of them dragged the sheep to a flat area to begin the butchering process. With their combined efforts, they separated the high-quality meat into different parts for packing. Each man then loaded a backpack and left the area. What followed was the part they were most looking forward to. Fresh ingredients often only need the simplest cooking methods. Steven sprinkled some seasoning on the sheep meat and then pan-fried it. He also prepared some flour and baked a few cream biscuits. After some effort, the delicious meal was ready. The biscuits paired with the sheep meat offered a unique flavor. The meat was neither tough nor dry, and it was chewed to perfection. They thoroughly enjoyed their meal, celebrating a very successful hunt. The men had hunted a bighorn sheep and acquired 300 pounds of meat. Steven roasted the tenderest cuts, and paired with a biscuit, enjoyed a satisfying meal. This time, he traveled to the Madre Mountains in Mexico to hunt turkeys. This area is one of the driest and most desolate places on Earth, but serves as the home to the Gould's wild turkey, one of the world's rarest and longest-legged turkey species. These turkeys have thrived here for thousands of years. It was Steven's first time hunting Gould's turkeys, and he was accompanied by his friend Jay, whose family had farmed the land for 200 years and who was also an avid hunter. For this expedition, they prepared several turkey decoys. After checking their supplies, they set off, quickly driving their ATVs over the rough terrain. They arrived at their destination and continued on foot. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, their first task was to find a place to stay overnight and consider hunting the next day. Along the way, they spotted fresh turkey tracks, indicating they were within the turkey's range. Jay used a tool to mimic the call of a hen, and after a short wait, a turkey appeared. However, it ran away upon realizing the decoy was not a hen. The two men climbed to a higher position to better observe the terrain. After searching, they spotted 3 turkeys happily playing. They did not make any sudden moves, but observed the direction the turkeys might take to roost for the night. In the evening, the turkeys flew up to roost in sycamore trees, giving the men a good indication of their location. The next morning, they leaned against rocks, waiting for the first crow of the morning. As the sun rose, the turkey calls became more frequent. They had already set up the fake turkeys and used strings to move the decoys, making them appear lifelike. They continued to simulate turkey calls with their tools. Their patience paid off when a turkey hurried over, flaring its tail feathers trying to impress what it thought was a hen, completely ignoring the hidden hunters. Before it could enjoy itself, a bullet struck, and it flapped a few times before dying. Steven grabbed it by the neck and used a rock to finish the job. Carrying the turkey on his back, he was beaming with joy for finally capturing a Gould's turkey. Back at the farm, Steven hung the turkey up to pluck it, then laid it out on a plate. To make the turkey meat delicious, ingredients were key. He prepared some salt and sugar, cut open a lemon and squeezed it into the pot, then prepared a clove of garlic. He then placed the turkey in the liquid to marinate for a whole day. At 3 a.m. the next day, the two men got up early and ventured back into the wilderness to hunt another turkey. After a while, another lucky turkey came running towards them, clearly in a hurry, indicated by its running posture. This urgency was due to the presence of another competitor in the area. Steven remained calm and quietly watched the spectacle until a plump turkey stood next to the decoy. He then pulled the trigger, and the turkey fell. They approached to inspect their catch, and seeing its plump form, Steven was thrilled and couldn't resist doing a turkey dance. After their playful celebration, they carried the turkey and began their journey back. Steven then visited a local charcoal factory and took a sack of charcoal, looking forward to his most anticipated part of the trip. After a day of marinating, the turkey was ready. He laid it on a wire mesh above the charcoal, sprinkled some chili over it, and carefully turned it to prevent burning. With his careful preparation, a delicious barbecue was ready. Jay tore off a piece and tried it. It was crispy on the outside and tender inside, with a unique flavor. Steven, too, savored the culinary delight. This time, he came to southwestern Montana with a friend, prepared to hunt some grouse. Reindeer, a professional bird hunter, had trained several hunting dogs, which were invaluable assistants. Each man led a hunting dog into the wilderness. The grouse were active in the high mountain areas, and it took them half a day to accidentally get themselves lost. They checked the map and realized their journey had only extended by a mile, which made them both laugh and cry. They continued onwards, and after overcoming various challenges, finally reached the top of the ridge. They needed to rest, but the dogs indicated their warm-up was just beginning. Energized, the dogs started searching for targets. Seeing the dogs' efforts, the men got into work mode. Soon, gunshots echoed through the wilderness. Reindeer fired twice, and moments later, a dog came running with a grouse. They had captured their first prey of the day. Reindeer couldn't help but show off to Steven, who was visibly envious. Steven was determined to outdo the older man today, driven by a typical male competitive spirit. However, the dense forest made spotting grouse challenging. After wandering for a while, Steven finally fired his gun. He had seen a grouse and immediately pulled the trigger. Inspired, he continued shooting, firing 3 shots, but all missed, frustrating him greatly. This amusing scene made Reindeer chuckle. Attracted by the noise, 2 curious grouse flew up. Reindeer slowly approached, startling the birds into flight. Exactly what he wanted. He enjoyed challenging himself, and his shooting skills were indeed impressive, hitting every target. An impressed Steven gave his first compliment of the day. Laughter and cheers resonated through the wilderness, heightening their excitement. Unfortunately, a sudden rain dampened their spirits, forcing them to end the hunt prematurely. However, the spring rain was brief. Before they even descended the mountain, they chose to clean the grouse by the creek, removing the innards, since the dogs didn't eat the intestines. After cleaning up in the creek, they continued on their way. They reached their truck, placed the dogs in their cages, and set off on their return journey. Today's hunt hadn't been completely satisfying, so they decided to try again the next day. The next day, as dawn broke, they set out with their hunting dogs to search for grouse. It wasn't long before they spotted one. Steven quietly raised his gun while the hunting dog, receiving the signal, dashed out, startling the grouse into flight. Ronis fired the first shot, followed quickly by Steven. Soon the dog retrieved a grouse from the bushes. They had a very smooth start to the day. The two hunters continued on, approaching this hunt with a relaxed mindset, enjoying the outdoors and taking things as they came. They randomly selected their targets. One grouse flew by at high speed and escaped, likely startled early by the dog. They moved on, today traveling further and higher than the day before, but unfortunately, today's yield was meager. By midday, the dogs were exhausted, so the men decided to head home. The grouse they had hunted over the 2 days were enough to make a delicious dinner. They went to the riverbank to begin processing the grouse. The method of skinning was simple. They stepped on the two wings and pulled on the legs slowly but forcefully, splitting the bird in two. Apart from the legs, the rest was discarded. The breast meat, pink and tender, was thoroughly cleaned. They then heated oil in a pan, prepared some chili, and wrapped half a pepper with 2 pieces of grouse meat before frying it. The sizzling sound was delightful. The legs were fried directly until they turned brown. Then some cream was added. They also cooked a pot of pasta, creating 3 dishes that looked and smelled fantastic. Ronnie's couldn't help but exclaim in amazement, eager to start eating. They began tasting the hot grouse meat with the fragrant chili, which was instantly exhilarating. Ronnie's chewed enthusiastically, admiring Steven's culinary skills. Just then, a doe appeared in their view, possibly drawn by the scent of the food. However, the hunters paid it no mind. With such delicious food in front of them, eating was their priority. They thoroughly enjoyed their meal, embodying the true spirit of outdoor adventure.
There we go.
Dang.
Man.
That's unreal. The marrow is awesome.
Yeah, the marrow really makes it rich, you know.
I mean, this is amazing.
Steven, a full-time hunter and gourmet, arrived in New Mexico today to pursue Grouse deer. Accompanying him is his friend Rami, who enjoys pushing limits and plans to hunt with a bow, presenting a formidable challenge due to the timid nature and sharp instincts of Grouse deer. Despite the deer's usual wariness, the rutting season has made them restless and less cautious. Steven and Rami, from a vantage point, soon spotted a deer, though it was a bit far. Deciding to split up, Rami crossed a canyon and climbed a slope. He used deer antlers to create friction sounds to attract a buck, while Steven stayed behind to continue scanning the valley. Steven, increasingly excited by the abundance of deer, was determined to find a robust buck. Meanwhile, Rami, with his bow and arrow, moved closer to a beautiful buck in range, mimicking deer calls and watching its every move to lure it closer. Unfortunately, by nightfall, both had caught nothing. When Steven returned, Rami had already started a campfire. They shared their experiences and spent the night. The next morning, they resumed their hunt. Rami, on a hillside, spotted a buck about 350 yards away. With ample time, he waited for the perfect opportunity, knowing patience is crucial for a top hunter. Meanwhile, Steven continued searching for deer. Around noon, he spotted one across a ridge but lost sight of it. Approaching cautiously, he crawled near and eventually saw 2 does. Where there are does, bucks are likely to appear, so he waited patiently. His patience paid off when he saw a buck in nearby bushes. Slowly raising his gun, the buck, unaware at first, suddenly looked toward Steven. In a swift moment, Steven fired, and the buck fell, raising a cloud of dust. Stunned, Steven calmed his excitement before approaching the beautiful deer. The coyote deer, being relatively small, looked endearing. Steven dragged the deer to an open area, skinned it, removed the innards, and hung it on a tree to continue processing the hide and dismembering the limbs. Looking forward to the next step, he sliced onions, prepared some garlic and dried chili, then heated oil in a pan. He added these ingredients and stir-fried them before taking out a venison steak, chopping it with an axe, and adding the pieces to the hot oil. Once browned, he added the previously cooked ingredients, seasoned them, poured in some water, covered the pot, and simmered it for several hours, burying it in sand to cook. Elsewhere, Ramy was waiting for an opportunity when a deer passed by below. He grabbed his backpack and chased after it. When he arrived, the deer curiously looked at him, leading to a somewhat awkward standoff. The deer broke the silence, prompting Ramy to aim, but it hopped away, eluding him. He never found the right moment, making him regretful as hunting conditions worsened. He began his return journey. By nightfall, Steven dug up the buried pot to find a charred mess, resembling dark cuisine, but at least it was cooked. The ribs were tender and surprisingly tasty, leading to a hearty meal. The next morning, they set out again, focusing on Ramy's hunting success. Steven pointed out active deer areas and let Ramy proceed alone to increase his chances. He also prepared a secret weapon, a deer hide on a tree branch as a decoy. Ramy manipulated antlers to mimic buck fights and imitated calls to attract nearby bucks. A deer soon appeared, rushing toward the decoy, but it fled in the opposite direction. Exhausted and thirsty, Ramy doubted himself and resolved to bring a rifle next time. Despite the setback, he unexpectedly encountered a deer near some bushes on his way back, a rare opportunity. He silently aimed and shot. The deer ran off in pain, but Ramy, excited, retrieved his young buck, proving himself. He skinned and butchered the deer, making a delicious rib soup. Days later, he arrived in California to team up with Hunk, a chef who learned hunting in his later years and lived as a gourmet hunter. Sharing similar interests, they became close friends. They visited a friend's farm filled with black-tailed deer, wild pigs, and small game. After setting up tents, they observed from a high point, spotting many wild pigs, but no black-tailed deer yet. After a thorough search, they spotted 4 deer, including a buck, boosting morale. However, local laws prevented hunting large animals on the arrival day, so they marked the location to hunt the next day. With plenty of time left, they hunted small game to pass time and satisfy their hunger. Hunk casually picked a sour cherry, then saw a rabbit and missed his first shot, smiling awkwardly. Another rabbit appeared, and after 2 shots, he hit it, but had to shoot again to ensure it was dead. This rabbit, perfect for lunch, contradicted the common belief that rabbit meat tastes bad. Hunk was known for cooking overlooked animals, and rabbit was one of his specialties. With food secured, they returned to the hill to continue monitoring deer and pigs, especially marking any bucks for the next day's hunt. As daylight faded, they ended their observation, spending the night in silence. Early the next morning, the 2 men arrived on the hillside waiting for the deer to appear. Soon, they spotted a buck and immediately pursued it. They crossed mountains and came to a rocky area near the buck's territory. Hunk hid there, waiting for his chance. Steven stepped back, giving his friend the opportunity, but unexpectedly spotted another buck about a mile away. Energized, Steven took action. He crossed steep slopes and dense bushes, approaching from upwind and catching the buck off guard. The deer, taken by surprise, stood still. Steven fired but missed due to excitement. The deer, frozen in shock, forgot to flee. As a top hunter, Steven didn't miss twice. His second shot was accurate, and the buck fell after a struggle. Hearing the gunshot, an envious Hunk knew Steven had succeeded. Steven approached the black-tailed deer, pleased with its robust condition. Due to the heat, he dragged it to a shaded area. Meanwhile, Hunk waited in vain for his deer to appear. As he grew anxious, Steven started skinning the deer and sorting the meat. It was time for lunch, and Hunk prepared to cook his specialty, rabbit from the previous day's hunt. He stir-fried it with onions until brown, then added garlic and ziziphus fruits, a great seasoning, along with a bit of saffron, leaves, and 2 chilies, simmering it gently. An hour later, Hunk lifted the lid, added some homemade grape wine to enhance the broth's flavor, and Steven eagerly tasted it, finding the broth delicious and the meat tender and flavorful. After a fulfilling meal, they resumed their hunt, this time targeting wild pigs. Despite their cunning nature making them difficult to hunt, the area was teeming with them. The men split up. Hunk crossed a creek toward the opposite ridge while Steven checked the oak forest in the valley. He soon saw a sow with piglets, but the wind was against him, so he waited quietly. His chance came when the pigs passed by. He fired but missed. The pig sprinted away like the wind, leaving no chance for a second shot. However, unwilling to give up, Steven pursued and found the pig had collapsed, hit by his first shot, adrenaline carrying it that far. Just then, Steven spotted another pig approaching and met it with his gun. The pig sensed danger too late and sped up, but it was already too late. Steven shot accurately, achieving a double kill. Meanwhile, Hunk heard the gunshots, feeling envious but finding no pigs himself. Steven dragged the pigs to a shaded spot, removed their innards, and met up with Hunk, who had brought the truck. They transported the pigs back to camp, where it was Hunk's turn to perform. Disappointed not to have hunted a pig, he still relished the chance to cook. He started with deer meat, cutting it into chunks, searing them in oil until they changed color, and then removed them. He then poured homemade wine into the cooked onions and soaked the meat in it, adding various spices including chili, sage, and leaves, and simmered it gently. Hunk then took a pig heart, scored it along the lines, flattened it, coated it in acorn flour, and fried it in oil, turning it once it browned. The aroma was enticing. He also made a simple sauce with matsutake mushrooms and onions, placing it on the pig heart. Now the meal was ready. Steven tasted it, finding it incredibly delicious. And the deer meat soup was also ready. They ate heartily, making it an unforgettable wild meal. And Steven felt deeply satisfied. Today, Steven arrived on Prince of Wales Island, prepared to hunt a black bear. This remote location is rich in vegetation and various wildlife. Steven and his friends built a hunting cabin here, turning it into a paradise for outdoor activities. However, maintaining the place requires much work. Last August, after a fishing trip, his friends closed the cabin and it has been unvisited for 9 months. Today, he came to check it. As expected, it was in disarray. Bears had turned it into a cozy den. Steven endured the smell and cleaned up the cabin. Then he went to the creek to get the water supply system working again. This gravity-fed system allows creek water to flow through pipes. Steven cleaned the filter, placed it over a barrel, and set the pipes on top to restore the system. He removed air from the pipes to help the water flow faster. When he returned to the cabin, the taps were working. He chopped some wood and started the stove, bringing life to the cabin. By the light, Steven planned his hunt for the next day. The best place to find bears is the estuary, where they fish in the fall. Although it's not autumn, bears still visit to eat grass and bivalves. After planning, Steven went to sleep. The next morning, he pulled out a small boat and installed the motor, which still worked. Steven loaded his gear onto the boat and set off, excited about the adventure and the beautiful scenery along the way, making his spirits soar. This area is a haven for hunting and fishing. Before reaching his destination, Steven was already thrilled. The beach was covered in mussels, a favorite food of black bears, and Steven himself. At restaurants, he always orders a plate of mussels. However, he needed to be cautious with wild mussels due to the risk of neurotoxins from red tide. Steven collected a large pot of mussels and washed them thoroughly in seawater, but mussels alone were not enough. Before hunting the black bear, he set up crab and shrimp traps. This area is known for its crabs. He threw the iron cages into the sea, then went to a narrow bay where prawns thrive due to the unique terrain creating pits. Steven dropped the shrimp traps in, setting up all his traps. It was time to search for the black bear. He slowly navigated through a series of narrow passages and soon saw 2 large bears by the shore, not cubs, but possibly siblings, not his intended targets. Steven needed a fully grown bear, so he delved deeper. However, the noise from the motorboat could scare off bears, so he switched to a canoe for quieter movement. Across, the snow-capped mountains enveloped in mist looked enchanting, but the increasing rain dampened his mood. After an hour of paddling, he spotted a new black bear. Observing its movements, Steven saw the bear jump into the water and swim to the opposite shore. The water obscured its true size, so he followed until the bear emerged on land. Confirming it met his criteria, Steven prepared to shoot, but the bear quickly disappeared into the forest, frustrating him. With night approaching, he had no choice but to return to the cabin. The next day, Steven returned to the area and, after some searching, finally spotted a black bear. He tied his boat to a rock and stealthily approached. The bear was unaware of the danger, continuing to eat even as Steven set up his rifle. Just as he was about to shoot, another bear came into view from a different direction. This bear was smaller, so Steven kept his focus on the first one. However, a strange thought suddenly entered his mind. He liked the bears and preferred to watch them quietly rather than shoot them. Feeling unusually sentimental, perhaps because men also have their sensitive days, Steven decided not to shoot. The bear was unaware that it had narrowly escaped death. Steven packed up his mixed emotions, collected the crab traps, and found them full of plump crabs. The shrimp traps were also successful, yielding large, meaty shrimp. Back at the cabin, Steven prepared for a seafood feast. He cleaned the seafood, lit the stove, and poured fresh water into a pot, adding salt to mimic seawater, a trick he learned from a neighbor. This method brought out the sweetness in the crabs, although he didn't understand the science behind it. The taste was excellent. After about 10 minutes, he added the shrimp and mussels to the pot. Meanwhile, he warmed up some cheese. Once the seafood was cooked, Steven peeled a shrimp, dipped it in butter, and tasted it, finding it delicious. He then enjoyed the crabs, which were not only fresh, but also had an excellent flavor, and the mussels were equally delightful. This seafood meal left Steven very satisfied. Even tough men have their tender moments. Faced with the adorable bears, Steven couldn't bring himself to kill them. For a hunter like Steven, this was a significant psychological shift. He needed to manage his emotions and relax from the constant hunting mindset. Therefore, he didn't go hunting that day, but instead prepared to host a feast with friends, enjoying the happiness that good food brings. The main ingredient was a wild boar from a previous hunt. Mate, his culinary mentor who had taught Steven many cooking techniques, generously offered his kitchen today and guided him on how to cook the boar's head. They also planned 3 other dishes: a delicacy made from pig skin, sausages from rib meat and intestines, and brined smoked ham. The pig's head had been pickled overnight in a solution, now giving off a marinated scent, and the eyes turned milky white. The next step was to cook the head face down until tender, also preparing to cook 4 pig feet with it. To remove any gamey taste, Steven prepared herbs and pepper, wrapping them in cheesecloth to make a bouquet garni, and threw it into the pot. He also added carrots, celery, onions, and leeks. 2 cups of white wine were poured in, followed by enough water to cover everything, then simmered for 3 to 4 hours. The next dish was the smoked ham, made from the wild boar's thigh. While many large animals exist on the planet, few can compare to the taste of pork, according to Steven's experience. Mate's distinctive brine would make the ham taste uniquely delicious. The brine included numerous ingredients such as brown sugar, orange peel, celery seeds, 5-spice, cloves, bay leaves, and more. The boneless thigh had been soaking in the brine for a while. Now removed, Steven sprinkled some gelatin powder on it. Gelatin, made from animal skin and bones through many processes, is a food additive that helps the meat firm up. Steven took out a meat rolling machine, stuffed chunks of meat into it, and fitted a mesh at the other end. By pressing, the meat was pushed into the mesh, which helped keep it from spreading out. Then, he tied it into a smoker for slow cooking. After a long time, the two opened the lid to check on the pig's head. Most of the meat on the skull had fallen off. Mate picked up a pig's trotter, noting its abundant fat and gelatin-like collagen, indicating it was almost cooked. They removed these items and filtered out the cooking liquid, preparing for the next steps. Steven was responsible for removing the meat from the skull, while Matey prepared the side dishes. They then cut open the pig's trotters and sliced the pig's tongue into thin strips. After mixing these ingredients, they placed them all on a dish, added spices and salt, mixed them well, and poured in some vinegar. They set this dish aside and added some cooking liquid, rich in collagen. The second dish was now ready. Next, they cleaned the intestines and set them aside. They then took out a bowl of quality pork from the refrigerator and prepared some side dishes. Steven was in charge of mincing the meat, while Mate chopped vegetables. The division of labor was clear, and they soon finished preparations. They mixed the chopped vegetables and minced meat, kneading them together until well integrated, then processed it again in a mixer to achieve a fine texture for the sausages. The final step was to stuff the meat mixture into the sausage casings, a process that required careful handling to avoid tearing the casings. As they admired the beautifully formed sausages, Steven smiled with satisfaction. Mate used a wooden skewer to prick any areas with trapped air. Then, they rolled the sausages to an even length. They were now ready for the last dish, deep-fried pork skin. The skin, taken from the back of a wild boar, was first boiled in broth for several hours. This broth was something Mate had prepared with care, blending various ingredients together and adding some lime juice. After simmering for hours, the flavors infused into the pork skin. Now, Steven cut the pork skin into slices and placed them in the oven to bake for a while. As guests were arriving soon, Steven grilled sausages in the yard, while Mate fried the dehydrated pigskin in oil until crispy, seasoned with cumin. The ham was smoked, and the pork head meat had set into a jelly. They sliced the ham and arranged all the dishes on the table. The guests eagerly enjoyed the feast, each dish providing a memorable flavor, and the evening was filled with laughter and joy. Days later, in the central region of British Columbia, Steven teamed up with his friend Ryan to hunt elk in a dense swamp during the rutting season. Ryan, skilled at mimicking cow-elk calls, helped attract bulls. They faced numerous challenges but finally reached their destination, finding elk tracks and bear prints along the shore. Before hunting elk, Steven aimed to catch a bull trout, a fish he had never caught before. Using barbless hooks to avoid harming the fish, they competed in fishing. Ryan caught a bull trout first, and Steven also succeeded, releasing his catch afterward. Now, they were ready to focus on hunting elk. The two tied their boat to the shore and chose to proceed on foot. Ahead was a beaver pond, its dam raising the water level significantly. Suddenly, heavy rain made the journey even more challenging. As they moved, they kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. Steven faintly heard the call of a bull elk in the distance. They immediately became alert and cautiously moved toward the sound. Ryan showcased his skill by mimicking a cow elk's call, which drifted far, likely to attract the bull elk. After a brief discussion, they devised a plan. Ryan would move away while continuing to imitate the cow elk's call, and Steven would stay put, hoping for a face-to-face encounter with the approaching bull. Ryan, while making the calls, rubbed branches against each other to simulate a cow elk leaving the area, increasing the urgency for the bull elk and reducing its alertness. Unfortunately, despite the prolonged calling, no elk appeared. They continued in the direction of the sound, and soon, Steven signaled that there was activity ahead. They heard noises from the bushes and, sure enough, an elk emerged. Steven quickly aimed and decisively fired. After the gunshot, the elk disappeared into the bushes. Steven was confident he had hit the target, but Ryan was incredulous as he hadn't seen anything when Steven shot. After calming down, they began to track the elk. As they progressed, Steven felt uneasy. He had aimed for the heart, and the elk should have fallen, but there was no sign of it. He worried he might have missed, and the wounded elk could become highly aggressive. Just as they decided to split up, Steven spotted the elk again and took another shot, quickly reloading and pursuing. Unfortunately, the dense bushes severely obstructed his view, and the elk vanished. In the tense atmosphere, Steven became somewhat reckless, and unexpectedly, he encountered the elk around a corner. As the elk stood up, Steven prepared to end its life. But at that critical moment, his rifle jammed. The elk charged at him, frightening Steven into a panicked retreat. Fortunately, the elk was injured, allowing him to gain some distance. Ryan saw his chance and decisively shot, and this time the elk finally fell. Steven caught his breath to calm his excitement. Ryan couldn't resist teasing him about a close call, joking about a hole in his pants. After the laughter, they went to check on the elk, finding it had stopped breathing. It was an impressively large animal, giving a strong visual impact. Suddenly, thunder sounded, and it seemed a storm was imminent. It looked like they would have to camp there for the night. They returned to the boat to gather their gear, marking their way. Soon, a heavy rain with hail began, typical of the wild and unpredictable weather. They made it back to the kill site, built a fire, and started the laborious process of butchering the elk. They skinned it, cut the meat into different sections, packed them categorically, and transported them to the shore. By the next morning, they moved the meat onto the boat and started their journey back. Once they reached the parking spot, there was still one important task before heading home: enjoying the delicious food. Steven cut a tender piece of meat to grill elk steaks and threw a bone directly into the charcoal fire. He seasoned the meat with salt and placed it in a skillet, sizzling immediately. When the steaks were nearly done, they retrieved the large bone, cracked it open with a stone, and poured the marrow over the steaks, acting like butter. The taste was absolutely delightful. Ryan, who had never experienced such delicious food, was profoundly moved.
Man, Man.
That's unreal. The marrow is awesome.
Yeah, the marrow really makes it rich, you know.
I mean, this is amazing.
Soon after, he came to the southwestern mountains of Montana, prepared to hunt an elk. In his opinion, elk meat is among the best in the world. However, the complex terrain and cold weather made hunting challenging. Additionally, other hunters in the area meant competition for Steven. Luckily, upon his arrival, he spotted several elk, including a mature bull. They were active on the mountainside. Steven set out fully equipped, but soon noticed a problem. There were tracks from 3 sets of boots in the snow, indicating that 3 hunters were already tracking the elk. Using his binoculars, Steven only saw 2 female elk. The bull he had seen earlier was gone. Disappointed but undeterred by the sudden heavy snowfall that reduced visibility, Steven pressed on, hoping to get closer. His plan was thwarted when he spotted another hunter across the way, likely having startled the bull elk. Steven decided to circle ahead and wait for the hunter to drive the elk toward him. His strategy paid off as the herd emerged from the forest not long after he arrived. Unfortunately, the group included only a young bull, which, according to local laws, could not be legally hunted. As dusk approached and the temperature dropped, Steven had no choice but to end his hunt for the day. The next morning, he returned to continue his unfinished hunt. Today felt luckier. He spotted a legal bull elk on the ridge. Steven decided to wait along the path the elk would likely take. However, his spirits soon dampened when he realized another hunter had the same idea. Both hunters pretended not to see the elk, hoping to mislead the other. After observing for a while, Steven was sure the other hunter was targeting this elk. Not wanting to cause conflict, he graciously backed off, knowing of an alternative hunting site called Break Leg Ledge, a name derived from elks, sometimes rolling down the steep mountain paths. It was a tough climb, but his effort seemed worthwhile when he spotted a group of elk through his binoculars. Unfortunately, they were all females and calves. Steven sat quietly for hours, seeing many deer pass by but none that met the legal criteria, except for one young bull. As he grew colder, the real danger of hypothermia set in. He built a fire to warm up and organize his thoughts, planning his next move. 3 miles away was the opposite side of the valley, which he wanted to check out. Just then, he spotted 2 bull elk in the distance, which presented a dilemma. If he pursued these elk, he might not complete the hunt before dark. He also risked missing a bull appearing at his current spot. After much thought, Steven decided to stay put. If he failed to hunt today, he would try the opposite valley tomorrow. As expected, no bull showed up by the end of the day. The next morning, as dawn broke, Steven set out on his journey to the area where he had seen 2 bull elk the previous day. By the time it was fully light, Steven had arrived. The snow was cluttered with disordered elk tracks. He positioned himself on a high ground and began his quiet wait. Over the next few hours, Steven's heart sank as he saw no sign of any bull elk. He couldn't help regretting not decisively tracking the 2 elk he had seen the day before. Hunting is such that if you don't seize the moment, failure is inevitable. Steven learned from this experience and had no choice but to end his hunt, planning to try again next hunting season. Hunting grizzly bears is a thrilling and dangerous activity that can be fatal if one is not careful. Yet, it attracts many hunters, including Steven, who felt a rush of adrenaline and a desire to test his strength against these massive creatures. This took place in the Rocky Mountains of British Columbia, a region with a very primitive ecosystem and home to numerous wildlife, including black and grizzly bears. It was Steven's first time in this area, accompanied by his friend Ryan, a passionate hunter with a hunting guide license. As they moved up the mountain, tasting wild berries along the way, they climbed about 1,000 feet and spotted a huge grizzly bear through their binoculars. The bear was with cubs, which indicated it was a mother bear. A male would have killed the cubs. Out of respect for wildlife, Steven's target was a mature male bear, so after watching the mother bear for a while, they moved on in search of other grizzlies. They soon encountered a black bear that had unwisely wandered into grizzly territory. The mother bear was furiously rushing towards it. They watched this scene with excitement, but became concerned when they noticed another grizzly bear in the distance. They were worried because a filmmaker with them was about 300 yards away, possibly unaware and at risk of wandering into the conflict. They searched for him but didn't find him. Instead, they had an unexpected encounter with the mother bear. They shouted loudly, trying to scare her off. Protective of her cubs, she charged at them bravely. They had no choice but to fire their guns repeatedly, hoping the noise would deter her. Fortunately, this worked, and the bear backed off. They quickly changed their position, and the gunfire got a response from the filmmaker. They rushed to his location and managed to regroup, calming their nerves only at that moment. The following morning, they emerged from their tents to resume their hunting. They soon spotted a grizzly bear, but by its small, narrow head and prominent ears, they could tell it was not fully mature. Adult male grizzlies have broader shoulders and longer necks. They continued to observe from a ridge overlooking the valley. Ryan noticed a bear, but upon closer examination, it turned out to be another female. They ventured deeper in search of other bears. The area was teeming with grizzlies, but all were either females or cubs. Watching them play and fight was amusing. They did encounter a male bear, but it was a black bear, not their intended target. Luckily for the bear, it escaped unharmed, and they returned to camp empty-handed. However, just as they got back to camp, they saw a large black bear nearby. Although it was not part of their original plan to hunt black bears, an opportunity like this was too good to miss. Steven began to aim, and the black bear remained unaware of the danger. The next second, a gunshot shattered the silence, and the bear instantly fell and started rolling down the hill, picking up speed. The two men kept their eyes on the target to pinpoint its location. After waiting a moment, they went to search for their quarry. They split up, and it was Ryan who found the black bear, which was not yet dead. Steven fired another shot, ending its life completely. As night fell, they used headlamps to begin butchering the black bear. Upon opening its belly, they could smell the scent of blueberries, indicating that berries were a major part of its diet. After a long day, they were exhausted, so after removing the innards, they decided to come back the next day to finish processing it. The next morning, they hurried back to the site, but their worries materialized. A grizzly bear was lying on the innards, eating. It was a female. They shouted to scare it away, but this only piqued its curiosity, and it started walking towards them. With no other choice, Steven used gunfire to try to scare it off. However, the bear was unfazed by the noise, likely having never encountered hunters before. Fortunately, it eventually ambled away. They then approached and retrieved the black bear they had hunted the previous day, relieved that it hadn't been eaten by the grizzly. They packed the bear meat and brought it back to camp. After hanging the meat in a tree, they set out again, still targeting a grizzly bear. They climbed a mountain and soon spotted a grizzly. Its fur looked as if it might have albinism, so they decided to find another target. After some searching, they spotted another grizzly, this time a male. They quickly pursued it, but the bear was also moving, and catching it depended on luck. Unfortunately, they eventually lost sight of it. With daylight fading, they returned to camp to enjoy a feast. They selected some fatty cuts of meat, cut them into pieces, and rendered the fat by heating it. They then prepared some marbled bear loin, cooking it in the rendered fat. After a short wait, the meat was ready. They tasted it, finding it exceptionally delightful and chewy, filled with the aroma of blueberries. Although they didn't manage to hunt a grizzly bear, capturing the black bear made the trip worthwhile. Exciting. A man named Steven, a full-time hunter and gourmet, hunted a black bear and obtained quality bear meat. He rendered the fat into oil and cooked the loin in it, enjoying a hearty meal. Steven is now in southwestern Wisconsin, where his friend Doug runs a farm. The area is overrun with white-tailed deer, affecting the growth of oak saplings. Thus, Doug hunts several mature deer annually to control their population, ensuring the farm's sustainable development. With the hunting season 2 days away and a storm predicted, Steven and Doug scout locations. They must prepare before 2 apprentices arrive. A critical part of the preparation is ensuring deer presence, so Doug has set up a homemade bait device filled with juice in a tree to attract deer using their keen sense of smell. Although deer are the main target, Steven wants the apprentices to enjoy themselves. He plans to set beaver traps by the river in case the deer hunt fails. He sets traps along the beavers' paths using branches to guide them into the traps, and will check back in a day or 2. The following morning, Steven and Doug throw duck decoys into the river. After a wait, wild ducks appear, and the men quickly shoot, spectacularly bringing down several ducks. Duck is one of Steven's favorite dishes. Steven prepares the ducks for a beer duck recipe using strong beer, maple syrup, brown sugar, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg. After the sauce thickens, he sets it aside, then fries the duck until golden before finishing it in the oven. When the apprentices, former comedians who once enjoyed deer hunting in Montana, finally arrive, the duck is almost done. Steven serves the sliced duck beautifully and tops it with the sauce. The group enjoys the meal and conversation, creating a joyful scene. After dinner, Doug gives the apprentices commemorative hats and discusses the next day's plan. Steven and Joy will wait at the first canyon exit, while the others go to a ridge hunting spot. They position themselves early the next morning. Steven and Joy watch the valley exit, waiting for deer. A fawn appears, followed by more deer, but none are deemed worthy of pursuit, so they decide to wait longer. Meanwhile, Doug and Brian, stationed half a mile away, have not seen any deer. Brian's constant talking annoys Doug, but a deer's appearance interrupts them. Brian takes aim at a beautiful doe, shoots, and successfully makes his first kill. Elsewhere, Steven and Joy were patiently waiting when a young buck strutted by. Although Joy, as a guest, was allowed to hunt a young deer, he chose to adhere to the local hunting rules and let the buck pass. However, the buck lingered around them, eventually attracting another young deer. This sparked Joy's desire to shoot, and Steven encouraged him to take the shot. Joy fired, and the buck ran a short distance before stumbling and falling. They approached and found it was only a year and a half old. This was Joy's first white-tailed deer hunt, which excited him greatly. Meanwhile, Brian had shot a mature doe. Both hunters had made their first kills, and Steven shared the joy of deer hunting with the apprentices. Each had bagged a deer, raising spirits to a high point. The experience wasn't over yet. Due to an overpopulation of deer, farm owner Doug planned to cull several more to protect the ecological balance, providing good news for Steven and the others. At 3 p.m, Steven and Joy searched for a suitable doe. They spotted one feeding in a cornfield, but Steven, observing through the naked eye, deemed it too light, weighing no more than 50 pounds. Another doe appeared to the right, and Steven whistled to catch its attention. Joy took a decisive shot, but his aim was poor, and both does fled like the wind. Joy wanted to take another shot but lost sight of them. After a short wait, a doe reappeared and Joy fired again, confident he had hit the target. Steven observed that the doe did not reappear and likely lay down somewhere below, but they decided to wait a bit longer for caution. Meanwhile, Doug and Brian sat in a stand, waiting for a stroke of luck. Boredom set in, and Brian fell into a chatty mode, which Doug, now more accustomed, managed to tolerate. 2 does appeared, interrupting their conversation, including a mature one moving downhill. Joy was ready and shot the doe in the heart as it paused, instantly dropping it. Doug couldn't help but praise the shot, boosting Brian's spirits. Their luck continued as another deer appeared on the ridge, and this time, Doug took the shot as the deer showed its head. They went to check the first deer, a mature doe lying in a pool of blood. Doug checked his shot and followed blood traces to find the second doe, also dead. The pair returned with a full haul. Meanwhile, Steven and Joy set off to track their quarry. They found bone fragments at the scene, indicating a hit, but no blood suggested a leg shot, complicating things. The deer might not have died, or could have run far before collapsing. With darkness setting in, they planned to resume the search the next day. The busy work wasn't over. They brought the 4 deer hunted over 2 days back to the farm. Before the bodies stiffened, they butchered the deer, which were fat and covered in thick fat. After skinning, they brought the deer inside for slaughter, packaged the different cuts, and prepared them for sale in stores. The high-quality venison was much loved by customers. The next morning, they resumed their hunting efforts. Despite Steven being preoccupied with thoughts of the doe that got away, they had to wait as the early hours are prime for hunting. Unfortunately, they had no luck until the sun rose higher. They then set out to find the injured doe and discovered a bloodstain on the ground. Following the trail for a long distance, they still couldn't find the doe. Joy was filled with self-blame. Missing a clean kill meant the animal could be suffering, a terrible feeling for any hunter. As they proceeded, the blood trail showed no significant changes. After 4 hours and no sight of the doe, Joy began to cry. Steven comforted him, explaining that such experiences are part of a hunter's growth. He advised that in future hunts, one should only shoot when confident of a clean kill. Unable to locate the doe, they had no choice but to return home. Their experience lesson was ending the next day, and Steven thought about hosting a lavish dinner. He first checked the beaver traps by the river, finding 1 small frozen beaver and another larger one trapped. The favorite local dish is beaver tail, which is cooked by the fire until it bubbles and shrinks, then peeled to reveal rich fat. While Steven prepared dinner, the others tried their luck in the cornfield, but saw nothing by evening, so they returned for dinner. Steven prepared 2 dishes, a deer head seasoned with salt and pepper, rubbed with olive oil, added to chicken broth, wrapped in foil, and roasted for hours. The second dish was braised beaver ham with potatoes, carrots, mushrooms, and onions. After sautéing the vegetables, he coated the beaver meat in flour, browned it, added it to the vegetables, poured in some cooking cream, and simmered for an hour or two. By nightfall, dinner was ready, and it was thoroughly enjoyed, making for a pleasant evening. Months later, Steven visited the Cumberland Canyon in the Rocky Mountains to hunt an elk. Due to overhunting in the 19th century, elk populations nearly vanished but were restored thanks to conservation efforts. Early in the morning, Steven moved through the woods, listening to nature and seeking elk, usually found sleeping on ridges. He noticed the barn-like smell typical of elk bedding areas and successfully located an elk home. As he admired the view, he locked eyes with an elk. The bull elk was angry at the intrusion but chose to flee rather than confront Steven. This young bull was not Steven's intended target, so it escaped. Reflecting on the beautiful creature, Steven thought back to the American Revolutionary War era when elk were widespread. However, Western expansion led to significant wildlife slaughter. Conservationists have long worked to correct ancestral mistakes by reintroducing species in the late 20th century, including efforts by the Elk Foundation. They host annual summer camps, study, and decide who gets the coveted hunting spots. Steven also visited Bill, the local head, who deepened his understanding of elk history. The next day, Steven embarked on another hunting trip. Being his first time in this area, he was unfamiliar with the surroundings. Fortunately, his extensive tracking experience soon led him to discover elk droppings among the dry leaves and rubbing marks on nearby trees, signs that this was an elk habitat. Excited, Steven paid close attention to every detail, the beautiful sounds of the forest lifting his spirits. As he reached the top of another ridge, signs of elk became more frequent. He felt a bull elk was nearby, loaded his rifle, and soon, a bull appeared right in front of him. The proximity startled Steven a bit, and the highly alert elk bolted in a flash, causing Steven to miss his chance. As dusk fell, he ended his day's journey. The following morning, Steven returned to the ridge to continue searching for elk. A gentle breeze and the beautiful scenery lifted his spirits. Over time, he finally heard the call of a bull elk and followed the sound, which guided him in the right direction. Unfortunately, despite the elk calls continuing until dusk, Steven couldn't catch up to the animal. He marked this location, planning to try his luck again the next day. The next day, the temperature dropped slightly, which could affect the hunt. Steven climbed the ridge again, searching for any signs of elk. Suddenly, an elk's call echoed from nearby bushes. As he approached, he could smell the elk, and the sound seemed to come from the ridge below. Steven moved quietly, minimizing noise, and once close enough, he crawled on his knees and caught a glimpse of the elk. He raised his gun, took aim, and fired, feeling he had hit the target. Carefully confirming the elk was hit, he relaxed. After waiting a moment, he approached and found the elk dead, a large and beautiful creature. With reverence, Steven admired it before starting to butcher it. He expertly skinned it and cut the meat, hanging it on a tree. After finishing feeling hungry, he gathered some mushrooms from the forest to prepare a meal with the elk's liver. He sliced the liver, cut the mushrooms, heated oil in a pan, cooked the mushrooms until golden, then added the liver. It only took a moment before both were ready. He sprinkled some chili powder on top and tasted it. The flavors of the mushrooms and the tender liver were a delightful combination. Steven was very satisfied with his hunt. He had hunted a large elk, obtaining nearly 300 pounds of meat. Enjoying a delicious meal with wild mushrooms and the elk's liver, Steven, a full-time hunter and gourmet, had come to southwestern Colorado to hunt a mule deer. Mule deer, a crossbreed between eastern white-tailed and western black-tailed deer, fascinated him deeply. Accompanied by his friend Nate, also an avid hunter, they set up camp upon arrival and started their hunt early the next morning. The next day, they hadn't gone far before spotting several deer, but these were white-tailed deer, not their target. Mule deer, being larger, require a more expansive habitat and migrate with the seasons. They adapt well to both mountain ridges and bushy desert lowlands. As this was a public hunting ground, encountering other hunters posed a significant challenge to hunting mule deer. Using binoculars, they finally spotted a group of mule deer in motion. Tracking moving prey was almost impossible, so their main task for the day was to scout the area and prepare for the next day. After a day of observation, they had a rough plan. The next morning, they returned, hoping to find a suitable, mature, and large buck. They set up on high ground and began observing through binoculars. They hadn't yet found their target when a competitor appeared first. Needing to take the initiative, they started moving, trying their luck at encountering mule deer. After searching, Steven found a kill site from the previous day, evidence of another hunter's success, which made him envious and determined to succeed himself. Unfortunately, as the sun set, Steven felt increasingly disheartened, another day without success. As days passed from the 3rd to the 4th and then the 5th, Steven began to lose hope, planning to just stick it out for 7 days before returning home. His mood was dominated by frustration. Hunting mule deer seemed cursed, as he always returned empty-handed. This time seemed no different as he ended another day without success. On the 7th day, if there was still no catch, Steven was ready to head back. Perhaps by fortune, he then spotted several mule deer, including a mature buck, the first suitable one he had seen all week. Excited, Steven tried to calm himself. Unfortunately, the shooting angle was not ideal, so he moved closer. Luckily, the deer hadn't sensed the danger. He got down, aimed, and waited for the right moment before firing. The buck staggered forward until it collapsed behind a tree. They celebrated briefly before checking the prey. A trail of blood led to a massive deer. Steven was finally fulfilled. After admiring the deer, he began butchering it, first removing the tarsal glands, which emit scent, and carefully extracting them. He then cut through the pelvis to facilitate removing the organs and proceeded to separate the meat by different parts. The deer looked about 2 to 3 years old, its meat in prime condition. Steven filled his backpack and began his return journey. Back at camp, they set up a makeshift kitchen. Steven sliced the loin, chopped it, and did the same with the fat, mixing them together into a patty shape. He then fried it until golden on both sides, topped it with a slice of butter, allowing it to melt, and placed the patty on a slice of bread, adding some sausage, and sandwiching it with another bread slice, creating a homemade burger. This was the essence of sourcing fresh ingredients in the wild. The deer provided various cuts: the hind legs for delicious ham, the shoulder for sausages, and the head for charcoal grilling, each delicious in its own right. Steven was very satisfied with this hunting trip. A few days later, he arrived in Wisconsin, ready to hunt a turkey and catch some large carp. Accompanied by his good friend Jared, they headed into the wilderness early in the morning to wait for turkeys. Continuous light rain complicated their efforts. Jared kept mimicking turkey calls to attract real ones. Soon they heard turkey calls from behind the ridge and quickly moved into action. Reaching the top of the ridge by noon, they decided to split up. Jared stayed to continue calling, while Steven positioned himself on the opposite side to create a pincer movement. Unfortunately, no turkeys appeared, but a coyote did, which brought some amusement to Steven, though it disrupted their plans. Realizing the turkeys were unlikely to show, they decided to end the day's hunt. However, they didn't leave empty-handed. They found wild chives that tasted like a mix of onions and garlic with a hint of woodiness, making an excellent garnish. They picked some for later cooking. By nightfall, Jared's brother-in-law Kevin joined them, and they planned to go bow fishing for large carp, which proved to be a lot of fun. Steven quickly spotted a fish and speared a large, fat carp with an arrow, opening up a successful fishing session. They joyfully continued, pulling out one big carp after another. The next morning, they returned to the mountain, but the weather was still poor. Jared took cover under a tree while Steven roamed around, hoping to encounter turkeys. Both were unsuccessful, so they regrouped for a small adventure deeper into the woods. Their decision proved wise, as the sun finally came out, and they heard wild turkey calls. They crouched and crept quietly to the edge of the bushes, where Jared used a tool to mimic turkey calls. Steven focused intently ahead. After a patient wait, a turkey slowly appeared, but seemed to sense something was off and prepared to flee. However, this gave Steven enough time to shoot. He hit the turkey, and although it struggled, Steven ran up to it, ready to shoot again, but stopped as it ceased struggling, saving a bullet. He excitedly touched the turkey's feathers, feeling a rush of adrenaline at the moment of the shot, reaching a peak of excitement. Once calmed, they carried the turkey back. Their hunting trip wasn't over yet, as Jared was still eager. The next morning, they returned to wait for turkeys again. Unfortunately, by the time it was fully light, they had not seen any, so they packed up their turkey decoys and headed deeper into the woods. There, they spotted 2 turkeys foraging. They quietly approached, and once close enough, resumed their luring routine. Soon, a turkey walked right into their trap. As it realized the danger, Jared shot, successfully completing his hunt. He narrated the process in a calm tone, but his excitement was evident from his continuous talk. They examined the catch, finding the turkey about 3 years old, in prime condition for meat. Satisfied with their hunt, they were ready to head home and enjoy their delicious catch. A few days earlier, Jared's farm was filled with many friends and family eagerly anticipating Steven's cooking. The menu featured just 2 items: fried fish fillets and fried chicken. Steven first processed the fish, slicing it into pieces, then coated each slice in flour. He treated the chicken the same way, soaking both in egg wash before frying them in oil. It wasn't long before the fried chicken and fish were ready. To everyone's surprise, the dishes were exceptionally delicious, and they spent a joyful evening filled with laughter and conversation. A week later, Steven traveled to Alaska to hunt a black bear, accompanied by his friend Roque, a Navy SEAL commander with extensive combat experience but new to hunting. They flew to a small village in the southern Alaska range, where Buck, a local guide, met them in early June. The area was prone to continuous rain and swarms of mosquitoes, but fortunately, the weather was clear that day, lifting everyone's spirits. Buck detailed the terrain using a map. The next morning, after saying goodbye to Buck, the fully armed pair embarked on a 6-mile hike to the base of a mountain, their planned campsite. They quickly set up a tent and then went to a nearby river to fish for dinner. Despite the enjoyable activity, they caught no fish after several hours and decided to head up to a ridge to find a suitable lookout before nightfall. They spotted a grizzly bear, but only observed it quietly, as hunting was not allowed on their arrival day. The sight of abundant prey nearby thrilled them nonetheless. The next day, they set out early to search for a black bear. As they observed and moved, they found numerous tracks, and Roque, who had been on edge for 14 years, greatly appreciated this rare, relaxing experience. Although they didn't encounter any game that day, the scenic journey excited him. Unfortunately, it wasn't until evening that they saw their first animal of the day, a black bear emerging playfully from a pond. Its comical antics suggested it was enjoying itself like a mischievous child. They watched amusedly, opting not to disturb its fun, and watched it leave before lying down to sleep on the spot. On the third morning, they ventured deeper into the mountains, passing the pond where the black bear had played the previous day. They stopped to rest and unexpectedly saw 2 juvenile grizzly bears, indicating a mature female bear was likely nearby. A dangerous situation. Steven readied his weapon for any necessary action. They watched the grizzly cubs until they left peacefully, but the incident was a reminder not to wander carelessly. They then chose a specific spot to continue waiting for game. Unfortunately, they caught nothing as dusk fell. On the 4th day, they continued their vigil. By noon, they finally spotted a target and quickly pursued it. Getting closer, Steven mimicked a predator's call, and the black bear moved towards them. Roque took aim and decisively fired as the bear showed its head. The bear turned and ran. Roque believed he had hit the target. After waiting a while, they approached cautiously and found a blood trail leading to the bear, which lay still nearby, no longer breathing. It was a mature male, exactly what they were looking for. After calming their excitement, they began to process the bear. Using a small knife, they opened the bear's belly, removed the organs, and cut the meat into pieces, packing it into bags before shouldering their backpacks and starting the journey back. Back at camp, Steven began preparing lunch. He skewered the bear meat and grilled it directly over charcoal. Because high-quality ingredients often require only simple cooking methods, he waited until the meat turned brown, then sprinkled some chili and salt on top before tasting it. The bear meat was chewy and had a mildly spicy flavor, and the two enjoyed it immensely, satisfying their craving. However, the culinary delights didn't end there. Steven's favorite way to prepare bear meat was by slow cooking. He took a leg bone from the black bear, cut it into sections, coated them with flour, and briefly fried them in oil. Then he added the browned meat to a pot of pre-cooked vegetables, poured in some water, and let it stew for several hours. During this time, they decided to go fishing. The lake was home to many beavers, visible all around as they had settled there. The fishing didn't take long. Steven was the first to catch a fish, redeeming himself from a previous unsuccessful attempt. Unfortunately, Roque had yet to catch anything. Being considerate, Steven rowed to the center of the lake, where Roque finally caught a fish, fulfilling his wish. They thoroughly enjoyed the fishing, celebrating their plentiful catch, and were now ready to head home. Steven went to the garden and picked some silphium, which tasted similar to celery and was particularly good at removing the fishy taste from the meat. He placed the fish on the grill, sprinkled some salt over it, and also grilled the silphium roots alongside. By then, the bear stew was ready to come off the fire, smelling wonderfully aromatic. The fish was also grilled perfectly. They began to savor their meal. The fish was so fresh it almost melted in their mouths, and it tasted delicious. The bear meat was stewed just right, with a flavor that was exceptionally satisfying. Roque was very pleased with the experience of the past few days and deeply appreciated Steven's assistance. In Alaska's Brooks Range, one of the most remote places on Earth, lives a large species of moose. Steven arrived by plane, accompanied by his good friend Brent, a waterfowl biologist. Their first task upon arrival was to set up their tent, and then they began scouting the area. According to Alaska's laws, hunting is not allowed on the day of flight, so they spent the day exploring along the lake until dark, then returned to camp. The next morning, they set out officially. It was the mating season for moose, and the bulls were roaming widely in search of mates. They hoped to capitalize on this by using calls to attract the bulls. Soon, realistic-sounding moose calls, created by Brent using a tool, echoed through the wilderness. They also banged branches together to mimic the sound of antlers rubbing, enhancing the deception. If any moose were nearby, they would likely be fooled. Indeed, their calling attracted a response, but not what they expected. A grizzly bear ambled towards them, thwarting their plans. Moose, being highly alert, tend to avoid bears, so the pair decided to relocate and climb a high mountain for a better vantage point. Upon reaching a new location, Steven spotted 2 moose by the lakeside drinking water, but they were juveniles and not what they were after. They moved around the mountain, but their situation did not improve until the sun was about to set, ending their day's journey. The next day, before resuming their search for moose, they decided to fish for their food. The lake was abundant with pickerel, perfect for frying. After a successful catch, they climbed the highest peak again. Steven prepared lunch by frying the fish fillets in oil, which sizzled delightfully, and the fish turned out deliciously tender and tasty. Unfortunately, the meal did not bring them luck, and they returned empty-handed as the sun set. Time flew, and soon it was the 6th day with nothing to show. Their initial enthusiasm had waned, but they continued their daily search. Finally, after patient searching, they spotted several moose and quickly pursued them. As they got closer, Steven made some noise, startling the moose into fleeing. Brent wanted to shoot but felt the timing wasn't right. He mimicked a moose call, momentarily stopping one, but as he aimed again, the moose moved. He tried to repeat the call, but the moose ignored him this time. In his hurry to follow, Brent fell clumsily, missing a great opportunity, which frustrated him greatly. Steven was also visibly disappointed. It was their only significant chance in 6 days, and they were near tears. After calming their mood, they followed the stream planning to return to camp. Halfway there, they spotted a moose about 2 miles away. Unfortunately, with little daylight left, they could only plan to track it the next day. The following morning, they went to the last seen location, and luckily, the moose was still active nearby. To increase their chances, they split up. Brent headed into the bushes while Steven kept watch in an open area. Brent moved quietly and soon saw the moose. He set up his rifle and waited until half of the moose was visible before decisively shooting. Startled, the moose quickly disappeared from view, but Brent was confident he had hit his target. The two began searching, but an injured moose can be very dangerous, so they cautiously looked for traces in the grass rather than approaching blindly. They quickly found some fur, but it had no blood on it, suggesting that the bullet might have missed. Brent was very disappointed by this as he likely missed the shot, and with only 2 days left in the hunt, they decided to split up to maximize their chances. Steven went to a nearby mountaintop to observe the area, while Brent stayed near the camp to continue calling the moose. Fortune favored Steven as he spotted a mature bull moose, greatly boosting morale. He hurried back to camp but couldn't find Brent, who was also tracking a moose. To avoid disturbing him, Steven stayed put. After some time, Brent located the moose, but as darkness fell, they had to wait until dawn to continue. At dawn, they resumed their calls, hoping to attract the moose, but after an hour with no sign of it, Steven moved to higher ground and used binoculars to search. He spotted the moose, but it had moved several miles away. Steven used an antler to vigorously call it back, and this tactic worked as he saw the moose turn around. He signaled Brent to hurry over, and once reunited, they quickly moved towards the moose, continuing to call it intermittently. Their combined efforts brought the moose within shooting range, a moment they had long awaited. Brent took careful aim and fired when the moose stopped, then shot again as the moose was not yet down. The second shot was decisive, and the moose fell. They approached their prey, relieved to see its robust size, making their week-long wait worthwhile. After a brief rest, they quickly butchered the moose, sorted the meat, and packed everything into 2 kayaks. Floating downstream, they began their journey back. By noon, feeling hungry, they stopped to fish and skewered some of the deer meat and fish to grill over charcoal. After some time, enveloped by delicious aromas, they enjoyed a hearty meal, finding the flavors exceptionally satisfying. This hunting trip ended perfectly, marking a successful and fulfilling adventure.